All right, so yeah, I've got lots of different stuff that I'll run through. Some of it may be applicable, some of it may not be super applicable, and I'm hoping you can all find some things that you can take back to your organizations and be able to put into play. If you have any questions at all as I'm going through, please put your hand up. Totally happy to take questions as we go, so ask them during or ask them at the end, whatever works for you. So just a quick agenda of what we'll look at. So first we'll look at why building a diversified fundraising program is important. We'll look at some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in fundraising today. We'll look at some more advanced. Last time we kind of did more of kind of a basics approach. This will be a little bit more advanced. Some of the stuff will be repetitive, but we'll try to kind of give you a few additional ideas for new things you can do. We'll look specifically at best practices for year-end fundraising. That's a really important time for almost every charity. And now it's getting closer. We're a couple months away, but there's still time to make things happen and make sure that you can leverage that as much as possible. We'll do a little individual exercise where you can really work on a bit of a plan for your own organization, something that you can take back and put into play right away. And then we'll just look a little bit sort of at planning for the future and sort of what the next steps are. So a diversified fundraising program is really important. I mean, with anything, we don't want to rely just on one person or one group for providing whatever that is. If that's the case, if that changes, that can obviously mean dire things for the organization depending on how much they're relying on it. So really, we just want to make sure that we have different sources of funds coming in. You had said that right now it's just the board, which is great, but if suddenly you don't have the board there, things could get tough, right? So really what we want to look at is just trying to find ways that we can diversify the ways that we're bringing in funds. This example here looks at sort of government and corporate sponsorship, which is how a lot of organizations are run, but that government funding is no guarantee. Same with the corporate sponsorships, and if suddenly some of that dries up and you don't have other opportunities to be able to grow your fundraising, it could spell trouble for you. So really, on the left there, that's sort of a good mix. That's not necessarily saying that's what you need to shoot for or that's what's right, but just making sure there is that mix there so that if one area falls down, you've got other ones that you can fall back on and possibly leverage in a better way to be able to raise more money for your organization. One of the things that we always come back to is the donor pyramid. And this really looks at how we're going to bring donors in. Sometimes it's a funnel, sometimes it's a pyramid. Same kind of concept either way though. So at the bottom we've got all of the people who have made one gift, whatever source that might be through, direct mail, phone, online. And what we want to do is over time we want to try to build them up to higher levels of giving. So we've got monthly giving, mid-level, major, and bequests. Monthly and bequests are two things that I'll talk about today because those are two really sustainable sources of fundraising that you can build into your program. And so really we need a lot of people at the bottom and we're going to end up with a few people at the top. That's how it's always going to be, and that's how we want to be building things for any organization. So this is a chart. I'll just spend a couple of minutes going through it. I hope it's clear enough for everybody. I think it should be. I just always find this one an interesting one. So this looks at the ways that people feel is an appropriate way for them to be solicited for donations. So at the top, not surprisingly, is a friend or a friend's child or grandchild. That's very acceptable to almost everyone. And you see across the top there as well, you've got the different generations. And that's pretty much widely accepted across all the generations. The one you see third there is letter or message. That would be anything direct mail, anything you're sending through the mail. And then as you see, you go through, so TV, email, and then when you get down to the bottom, the things that people really don't like, where they don't really feel it's appropriate, is text messaging, street canvassing, door-to-door, voicemail. So those are the channels that people aren't as fond of and don't feel as sort of acceptable as a channel for them. So just something to keep in mind, and I think the other thing to watch for as well is if you're looking at sort of the boomers and the matures, those are some of our donors who are going to be our best prospects for giving larger gifts. And you see down at the bottom, they really don't like these things, whereas some of our millennials, they're not as worried about it, but you have to keep that in mind as well, that different people are going to look at things in different ways, and so just making sure that you're always finding an approach that everyone that you're talking to feels is very comfortable for them. So just looking at trends, there's a lot of things happening in the fundraising world, in the world outside of that, and I think a lot of the things that happen kind of in the general world do affect a lot of the things that we're seeing in fundraising as well. So one of the big things, wealth in society. I'm sure everybody's heard things about sort of the shrinking middle class and the disparity between the rich and the poor in many cases. And I think, Vancouver is a really perfect example of this, Toronto as well, where it's really hard for families who are supposedly middle class, but it's really tough for them to make it work with how expensive housing is, how expensive everything is, really. So that's just one thing we have to keep in mind, because a lot of the people who 10, 20 years ago were our really core donors in the middle class, just life in general is becoming more challenging for them, and they're focused on making sure they can send their kids to school with everything they need, and they don't have as much money to be able to donate to charity. And then at the same time, we see some of the richer people in society, and yes, they do have lots of money, but they're oftentimes making very large donations to one particular cause rather than spreading that out to sort of help the greater good. So just something to keep in mind is that we're always kind of dealing with that, and oftentimes we look at our competitors as being nonprofits or somebody else in a similar space, but a lot of the competition that we see is just from general products as well, where people are making a decision: do they want to purchase that new TV, or do they want to make a donation to a charity? And they're having to make some of those decisions. As well, we're seeing definitely an aging and more diverse population. With the boomer generation getting older, there's a lot of money there, and they talk about sort of the largest wealth transfer that's going to occur. A lot of that will transfer down to children, but I think increasingly there's an opportunity where they do want to kind of leave their legacy, leave their mark on the world, and so they're looking at ways that they can also give to charity. So that's why we'll talk about legacy giving, because that's going to be one key way that you can really kind of tap into that. And then also keeping in mind that people are a lot more diverse as well. Their interests are a lot more varied. So the more that we can do to really kind of tailor in and focus our efforts on specifically what their interests are, the more effective we're going to be. So the next trend, the fraying of the social fabric. A lot of this really relates to what's happening down in the States with Trump, which is a very polarizing topic for a lot of people. Certainly in the States, there's people who are very pro-Trump, people who are very anti-Trump. But I think we see a lot of that in Canada as well. And a lot of people want to have that discussion. And I think a lot of times we almost kind of ignore our own politics because it's just not as exciting as what's happening down there. So just keeping that in mind, that I think a lot of people have very kind of set positions on whatever that may be. And we have to just keep that in mind when we're talking to them, because what we say may really offend them for some reason. So we just have to be aware of sort of what people's beliefs are and what's really driving them to action. Video and digital is another big thing. For those of you who are on Facebook, which is probably most of you, I'm sure you've seen a lot more video. It's something that Facebook is really pushing for. That's really what they feel is what people want. So they are driving a lot more content that way. And if you look at other social media platforms as well, video is becoming increasingly popular. And video without sound is a big thing too. A lot of people are watching it on the bus or the train, and so little things like making sure you always have subtitles when you're doing a video is really important, because people, if they're not quickly engaged in it, they're going to quickly move to something else because there's another video right there. So I think that's just a trend, and that's what we're seeing right now for ways that people are really engaging, not only with charities but with other brands in general. And video is also a really compelling way to be able to tell a story. So I think it's a really good channel to leverage if you do have it. And then the other thing to keep in mind with video is 20 years ago, you needed a big production setup and you needed a proper video camera to do it. Nowadays, we all have our smartphones. You can film a fairly good video literally right in your pocket. And I think as far as donors go, if you have the opportunity to actually do a video sort of from the field, I think that's a really nice thing that donors don't often get to see, where they're getting to see sort of a live update, if you want, where they're actually seeing sort of their dollars in action. So I think just keeping that in mind, we don't need a big polished production. We can do a really fairly high quality video right from our hands anytime we want it. Time is another big one. I know we're all busy, and I thank you all for taking the time to come out today, but I think this is one that we see people are getting more and more busy. They're trying to pack more activities in, whether it's taking their kids to 3 or 4 different sporting events throughout the week or just with their own time. So we have to remember that as well, that people don't necessarily have the time or even want to devote the time. So we have to make sure that when we are doing something, we've got something that sort of breaks through, catches their attention, and delivers that message quickly, because they're not going to have a lot of time to sit there reading for hours. So we need to make sure we can deliver our message in a very succinct way that allows them to understand what we're saying and making sure they can get on with whatever that next thing is that they need to do in their day. So looking at our donors, when we talk about being donor-centric, there's a lot of talk in the industry about donor love and that type of thing as well. It really means putting the donors first. So anytime we're communicating with donors, we don't want to necessarily talk about, look at the great things that our organization is doing. It's, here's what you have helped achieve with the donations that you've given to us. So I think that's one thing that we have to keep in mind, really always putting the donors first in whatever it is that we're doing, because wherever that money is coming from, if we didn't have those donors, we wouldn't be doing the work that we're doing. So just making sure that no matter what it is, we're always putting those donors first, making sure they feel appreciated for the money that they have given or the support they've given, and just making sure that no matter what it is, we're putting donors ahead of the organization, because really, like I say, without them, there is no organization. Yeah, so I think the key there is just making sure that when you're talking about the cause, you're talking about we're able to do all of these great things because of your support. So it's just that sort of that slight switch. It's not, you don't want to just focus on you're so great. Yes, we want to say that, but really it's, yeah, here's the things that we've accomplished because of your support. You've allowed us to do this and to do this. So it's just that little switch, because if you didn't have the donors there, you wouldn't have completed that project, right? Yeah. So any questions on any of the trends there? Okay. So, yeah. Sure. Yeah, radio is kind of a tricky one. I think, I mean, even 5-10 years ago, I think it was being used by a number of different charities and fairly successfully. I think the thing with radio nowadays is a lot, well, first of all, there's same with TV. Viewership has gone down quite a bit as far as sort of live radio or TV goes. There's a lot more people who are just watching everything on their PVR or watching it online. And same with radio, there's a lot of people who are downloading music on iTunes or Spotify. So I think it's just changed in terms of the reach that it has. But at the same point, it still has a big impact if you're able to reach the right people at the right time when you're doing it. So depending on who you're trying to target, and if you know, for example, one that's still fairly widely listened to is CBC radio. So if you know that that kind of matches with your demographic, there's still a lot of people and older people who are more likely to be donors who listen to CBC radio very regularly. So I think if that sort of lines up with your organization and what you're trying to do, there's still opportunities there. But it is certainly tougher just because less people are sort of focused on it. And there is still a number of people who do have it on at the office, and it's kind of in the background. But that's tricky too, because they're not really focused on it. So if you have kind of a brand that has more recognition, that they don't need to hear much more than a quick ad for Honda or Toyota or whatever, and that's helpful. But if you've got an organization like most of ours where you need a little more explanation, they're probably not taking the time to really kind of focus in on it. So I think it's really about kind of finding if there's a match there. And the radio stations will still provide you with lots of demographics about who's listening to their station. So there's still opportunity, but it's just, I don't know if it's as strong, just because I think the way that we consume media has shifted quite a bit over the last 5-10 years, really. And I think the advertisers and the marketers are working to find new ways of still getting the message out there. Like a lot of sites now, if you're going to watch a video, you've got that 15-second ad. There's no way around it, because they know, well, hopefully they've got you locked in. They still lose a lot of people who are like, oh, screw it, I don't need to see that video. But if you've got that video they really want to see, they'll sit through that ad. And a lot of times they might not have sound on. Again, that's why having the subtitles there is so important. But I think, yeah, it is shifting. And I know, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, I think it was Kiss FM. They announced that now the whole radio station is controlled by the audience. And so they have a new app, and you can go on and you basically vote for whatever song you want, and based on votes, that's the next song that's played. So that's just been launched, so I haven't seen a lot of it yet, but I'm sure. Yeah, there must be some kind of rules, I hope, but yeah. But I'm sure there's going to be very soon some ads happening on there as well. And so if they're able to engage people in that way, that might be an opportunity for an advertising platform as well. And who knows, maybe there'll even be video ads that pop up on there before you can go in and place your vote. So I think it's shifting, and so I think it's important to continue to watch and see. And yeah, there's certainly podcasts or another way that you can look at possible, and that you can get in on a really specific audience too, because they're specific topics. So I think it's really about sort of being kind of flexible and trying to find what channels those are that are going to be most effective. So some of the sort of advanced fundraising approaches we'll look at, we'll start with direct mail, which a lot of people think is dead or dying, but it's actually still really alive and well and a main fundraising channel for a lot of our clients. I'll chat a little bit about crowdfunding, which I know is one that a lot of people are interested in and trying to figure out how to make that work. And then we'll go to monthly and legacy giving, which is really two of the channels or two of the techniques, I guess, that are going to help you really sustain your organization into the future and make sure that you've got the money needed for years to come to make sure that you can do all of the things that you want to do. And one thing just to note, integration across all channels is really important as well. Because we're all busy, because we're doing so many different things, we're going to see the message in a lot of different ways. And so it's really important that you have that consistency so that if somebody sees one message through email and then they go to your website, they're getting the same message. Or if you've got a radio ad, for example, they're hearing that radio ad and then they're seeing the same thing on Facebook. So just making sure that whatever that message is, whatever the campaign that you're delivering is consistent throughout. Because if they hear one thing here and something different over here, they're confused, they're busy, they're not going to spend time to figure it out. They're going to be like, well, I thought they were asking for this and now I got other stuff to do. So just making sure that you've got a consistent message across all channels so that your donors understand what you're asking for and aren't getting confused. So direct mail, still a main driver of revenue for many charities. It's by far the lowest cost acquisition, which I think is important as well. It's going to be a lot cheaper than going through telephone, or you can, I mean, email is technically cheap, but you're also unlikely to get more than a few responses. So yes, you can do it for almost nothing, but you're also going to bring in very few donors. And if you look at the cost, I think the last report that came out showed that for acquisition, direct mail, as far as cost effectiveness, was 6 times better than all digital channels combined. So that's something to keep in mind, that yes, people are seeing lots of digital stuff, but they're not necessarily responding through those channels. A lot of our donors who are 60, 70 plus, they still prefer some of those more traditional channels. They might not trust online quite as much, and certainly that's changing and they're becoming more comfortable, but they still trust some of the more traditional channels. And then online giving continues to grow very quickly. It grew about 10%, it might have been 11% last year, but it still only represents about 7% of overall giving, which is quite a low figure, and it surprises a lot of people because I think a lot of people think that everything's happening online. And the other thing that I would mention there, and I'll ask you guys, what do you think for the for-profit world, what percentage of retail sales do you think happen online as e-commerce? Any guesses? 31, okay. 20, yeah. So it's actually right around 7%, which is shockingly low. But if we think about our habits as well, a lot of us browse online and then we go and make that purchase in store. And yes, we do a lot of online shopping, but there's still a lot more purchases that we make just regularly that we're not even really thinking about, but we're buying groceries and we're buying things at the drugstore, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, we may kind of comparison shop online, but we still make a lot of those purchases because it's still, that feeling is still really nice. When you make that purchase, you take it home, you're not waiting for it to arrive and then it's delayed and then it's stuck at the FedEx depot or whatever it is. So, and we usually expect fundraising to kind of lag behind the for-profit world, but in this case, they're pretty much dead even as far as that goes. And yes, e-commerce continues to increase, and fundraising will continue to increase, but there's always going to be that tangibility that really people like, and it really makes a difference. So will it continue to grow? Will it maybe surpass e-commerce? Probably, but it may not grow to 50% of fundraising like a lot of people seem to think it might.
So what is the other 93%? Is that checks in the mail and monthly transfers?
Everything else, yeah, exactly. It'll depend on the organization. Organizations, like we work with Amnesty International as one example, and they have spent the last 30 years really working on their monthly giving program. They generate about 2/3 of their income just from monthly giving now, which is really fantastic, and that's super sustainable. They know every year, I think it's about 8 or 9 million that they've got just for Canada that they've got coming in just via monthly giving. So they know they've got that guaranteed, and then anything else is on top of that. So it'll depend on the organization for what the percentage is. But yeah, that would be everything that's coming in through checks in the mail, through monthly giving, through legacy gifts, through major donors. So that would be the other 93%. I know, yeah. So challenges that are likely going to be apparent for all of you is a lack of resources, both money and staff, which can certainly make it more challenging. Depending on the resources, there may be a lack of creativity or flexibility. A lot of times we do see boards in place who don't really like sort of the traditional direct mail approaches that really work. They don't feel like that's right for the organization. But there's lots of information out there. There's lots of really good blogs that you can look at that can give you some advice on how you really want to approach it, because it is different than normal communications. Database can be another challenge as well. I think especially for a lot of smaller nonprofits, the database has sort of been put together slightly haphazardly over time, so it can be tougher to really be able to know what the history of specific donors is to make sure that we can speak to them in the right way. And then related to that is the appropriate segmentation as well, because we want to make sure that we're always, in whatever approach it is, we want to make sure we're asking for the right amount. We don't want to ask too low, because they might just say, well, sure, here you go. I could have given a lot more, but if that's what you need, this is what you'll get. And if you ask too high, they might be like, oh, I can't do that, so I'll just give nothing because I don't want to seem cheap. So it is really important to make sure that you're asking at the right level, but it's tough too if you don't have that history built in there. So a couple of these things I already mentioned, but some of the beliefs about DM is our own personal opinion, which we may or may not like it for whatever reason, but we always want to think about whether the donor or the potential donor will like it. That's the audience that we're speaking to.
What's DM?
Direct mail, sorry. Yeah. The board and staff, again, boards will often have quite strong opinions on it for whatever reason. Some staff, too, may think that, oh, that's never going to work. Like, I would never, for example, read a 4-page letter. But many of our donors would read a 4-page letter. We've even sent letters that are 8 or 12 pages, because if you've got really good content and the donors really care about it, they will read it. So yeah, we may not take the time to do it, but some of the donors will. So just always keeping that in mind as well, that we are not the donor, and they can look quite different than us. So and the ways that they're going to interact are different as well. Benefits, I think a lot of times people, they look at it and they think, well, I could just go and raise a one big gift from one donor, and that's way more effective for my time than trying to send this out to 5,000 or 10,000 people, whatever it might be. But we have to keep in mind, and going back to that donor pyramid, you need that big base, because you need to have those donors, because if you didn't have that base of donors to start, you're not going to find that one big donor, because they always started somewhere. For a lot of our clients that we work with, they'll find that usually between 60 to 70% of their legacy gifts will come from the direct mail donors. And some of those, we had an example just last week, or a couple weeks ago, from a client. They got a $4 million legacy gift, and that donor had given $300 in their lifetime. So you never know where those donations are going to come from. I think they've given like 6 gifts of $50 over like 20 years. But then they gave a $4 million estate gift. So you never know where those are going to come from, but that's why you want to build up that pool at the bottom. Again, kind of distributing the fundraising a little bit, and that'll make you more sustainable, because you've got that group of people who now you can make those other asks through. Negatives, I mean, some people just feel they don't want it, so other people won't want it. I think one of the interesting things that's happening is most of us now get most of our bills online. So it used to be when you went to the mailbox, bill, bill, bill. Now you don't really get any bills through the mail, or very few. So I think it's actually a more enjoyable experience, and I think many people are like, oh, what did I get? Like, what would be sent to me? So I think a lot of times they're more interested in interacting. And I think even with younger people, millennials, it's kind of a new thing for them, because they've never really gotten mail. So this is sort of a new thing, which, yeah, it might seem odd, but it's actually something that's like, hey, that's kind of cool. I got something in the mail, yeah. So just keeping that in mind as well. And then I think there's a lot of talk about, well, this is sort of how it is and it's never going to change, but there's a few sort of myths that I'll go through, because there's a lot of people who kind of feel really strongly, oh, no, that'll never work for whatever reason, but a lot of these are myths, and they actually do work quite well. So one of the first ones is that direct mail is expensive. Yes, there is a cost to doing it, certainly. It's going to be more expensive than doing something online, but printing and production has advanced a lot in the last 20 years, really. And it's actually not that expensive, even in smaller quantities now, to produce something. You can do a lot of stuff digitally. You can do a lot of variables with it as well to make sure you've got that segmentation right. So it's actually a lot cheaper than you might think. And it's a lot cheaper than a lot of donors think as well. Our clients will often get calls from donors where they're like, oh, how much money did you spend on this? I can't believe you're wasting all my money. And they are very ready to say, you know what, actually that only cost us about $1 to produce. And like, oh, I didn't think it was that cheap. I thought that was $5 or $10. So donors don't have a good perspective either because they grew up in a time when things would have been very expensive. So just keeping that in mind, sure you're going to get some complaints, but just be ready to deal with those. And the donors will appreciate the fact that you can tell them, you know what, the reason we do this is because we can bring more donors in, which means we can complete more projects, which is good for everyone. So just making sure that you're ready with that, but really it's not as expensive as most people think. The other thing, I've touched on this a little bit, is that people hate getting the mail. Like I said, I think maybe 15 years ago when it was mostly bills, yes, it was kind of a taxing experience to go and get the mail and be worried about what bills were in there. But I think it's a more enjoyable experience now. And I think it's something that a lot of people, and especially older people who might not have a lot of social interaction, it really is something they look forward to because they look forward to receiving letters and that gives them something to do for a little bit of time. So it can be a very enjoyable experience. And just keeping in mind that what we think personally is not necessarily what our donors or what our potential donors are thinking, because they could be in a very different sort of headspace than we are. Another one is that direct mail doesn't raise much money. Like I said, yes, if you go out and get one major gift for $50,000 or $100,000 or possibly even more, whatever it is, that's a lot of money at one time, and maybe you don't raise as much through the mail. But we really have to look at what those donors are generating over time. Yes, okay, so their first gift is only $25 or $50, whatever it is. But if we get them to start joining a monthly program, maybe now they're giving $100 or $200 a year. And then if we can work on moving them up that pyramid, they're going to be giving a lot of money over time. What we see for most of our clients is that if we look at sort of a 10-year long-term value from when they were acquired, they're worth somewhere between $400 to $800 each. And that includes the donors who only ever gave that one gift of $25. But it's because some of them go on to give much more than that. Their average is quite a bit higher. And I've even seen it higher than that as well, but that's a very sort of normal range that you can expect after 10 years, is to be raising somewhere in that range as long as you've continued to make the ask, continue to keep in touch with them, and share what's going on with your organization. So I touched on this, direct mail, certainly not dead. It's something that a lot of our clients are using very successfully still, and will continue to use. I think it's changing a bit, and I talked a bit about integration earlier as well. For pretty much all of our clients now, when we send a direct mail, we're sending a follow-up email a couple weeks later because we know that people are busy. They may have seen it, they may have meant to respond, so they forgot. So that follow-up email is a really little boost that'll generate another little bit of money. And then the integration side as well, just making sure you've got that, because a lot of people will get that direct mail pack and they'll go to Google and search your organization and say, well, what are these guys, what are they doing, what kind of projects they're working on? Or maybe they go to Facebook and they look at your organization there. So making sure that you've got that integration between channels to make sure that whatever channel they choose to connect with you on, they're getting that same message there. And I think another one as well is that direct mail only works for some of the bigger charities. Yes, they have some advantages in that they have, well, more donors that they can send to, more money that they can spend on it. But I think it's still a really effective tool to be able to kind of break through, make sure you get your message across. And like I say, with the way that printing has developed over the years, it's not that expensive anymore. It used to be you had to do a big campaign, but that's not the case anymore. And even if you do a really big campaign, it's not that much cheaper than if you just do a really small campaign. So there's still certainly lots of opportunity there. And yeah, major gifts are the only important kind of fundraising. Again, yes, this is nice if you have an unlimited pool of potential major donors, but most of us don't have that. So we really need that base, whether it's coming from direct mail or another channel, to make sure we've got those people who now we can approach for those major gifts. And like we said as well, in building a sustainable model, you don't want to rely just on those major gifts, because if one of them falls through, that could be 25% of your revenue now that you're short, and now you've got a big scramble to try to make that up. And then the last one, the internet will be the end of direct mail. This one is kind of funny because in a lot of ways I think we've actually killed email a lot faster than we have direct mail. because there's been so much spam that we all get an email, and I'm sure most of us have multiple email addresses, and some of them we use just for things we don't really want to see. So we've actually kind of hurt ourselves in that way because, and not us I'm saying, but I mean sort of the world at large, in how much email we send, because now people largely ignore email. And I think a lot of younger people, like under 20, email's barely a thing for them. They don't even really check it that much because that's just what they use to sign up for stuff. They don't really check it. They communicate through other channels. So I think that's changing as well, and that'll continue to change just because of how younger people are going to be in the future. But I think direct mail is one that's still going to stick around because, like I said, it's almost kind of new and unique at this point because it's something that a lot of younger people haven't seen, and it's something that I think is a lot more enjoyable than it was previously. So why it's more important than ever, you can reach people at home, which is increasingly tricky because so much of what we do in the media consume is on our commutes, on the train, on the bus, whatever it is. And that's very kind of fleeting. When you're able to actually get somebody at home, that's a lot more impactful, and they'll hopefully spend more time with it. It generates a lot of loyalty as well, and I think a lot of donors look forward to receiving regular updates and knowing what's going on with the mission. It's your best source for monthly donors as well, and normally the monthly donors who come in through the mail are going to stick around with the organization the longest. And it's still the best source for bringing in new donors into your organization as well. So there's a lot of different lists that you can access. So you can get lists of, in many cases, donors to other organizations or magazine subscribers, survey data. There's lots of lists out there, so you can actually send out, you can target it quite closely. You can send it out to 5,000 or 10,000 people, whatever it is. And then when they respond, now you'll have their information, and then you can continue to mail them on a regular basis.
And those lists don't fall into privacy rules or anything like that?
No, yeah, it's all fine. Yeah, I mean, they've all been opted in properly for the privacy rules. Canada Post actually is developing their own product right now as well, which is, we're just starting to test it. The nice thing with Canada Post is they have, well, I think it's 13 million addresses because they have access essentially to everybody's address. Lists will only have who's ever subscribed to that magazine or whatever it is. So they have a new product now, it's called postal code targeting, and so you can actually go in and what you can do is you can send them your data. They will look at your donors and then find you a list of the most similar donors based on the demographic information they have, and then you can mail out that way. So there's lots of different options out there. I can't tell you that this one's better than that one. It depends on the organization, but there's certainly lots of sources out there where you can send something out and bring new donors into your organization. Yeah, well, I think, yeah, for direct mail, yes, you're going to be limited to, well, normally within Canada. I mean, you could do it in the States as well. But I think that's why it's really good to have some of those other channels because Facebook is accessible to anyone, for example. And so that may help you bring people in from other countries. We also have a lot of people who are either moving to Canada, moving out of Canada. So if you can get some of those supporters really engaged, and most of the work that we're doing is internationally based, so it applies outside of Canada. You might have somebody who's going over to, let's say, the UK, and they can now talk to their friends about the great things the organization is doing, and they can go online and still access that information. So I think, yeah, that's certainly one pool within Canada, but there's definitely opportunities outside of that as well. And many of our clients, I mean, a lot of our hospital clients who are locally based, they send a lot of mailing to Hong Kong because that's where a lot of their donors still are because they have family who have come to Vancouver. So there's still opportunities there, and you can still mail outside of Canada. The acquisition side, not quite as much, but once you have donors on the file, you can certainly mail them regardless of where they are. So if you have a list, let's say you have a list of 5,000 people who are not donors to your organization, you send them a mailing, and let's say you get 2% of them sending it back. So now you've got 100 new donors who now are your donors who you can now talk to on a regular basis. Like I said, there's a lot of different sources. Canada Post would be one place to look because they have access to it. But there's a number of list brokers as well. One of the larger ones is Cornerstone. So they have access to hundreds and hundreds of different lists. And so if you go to them and say, here's what we're looking to do, here's who we're trying to find, they can help you find lists that are most tailored to what your organization is looking to do. Yeah. there's a lot of lists out there, which is kind of scary to think about because we don't like to think that we're on lists, but all of us are. And there's money to be made is the reason, because somebody who is interested in one thing, they're very likely to be interested in something else. That's why these organizations do it, because they can make money by selling the information, and they're allowed to because you've either opted in or you missed checking the box that says, please do not ever sell my name, which is almost always there. So yes, it's kind of a scary thought, but that's just how it is. Some of us probably get a lot more than others depending on how many lists we're on, but that's just sort of, that's kind of a fact of life. We can't do a lot about that. Yes, we can call the organization and say, please do not sell my name to anybody else, and that's fine. But by that point, we might have signed up on a few other lists, and who knows. So it's just how it is, and I think it's something that, yes, okay, fine, the lists are there. Let's make sure that we use them to leverage our fundraising as best as we can. Totally, yeah. And the level of data collection online as well, I'm sure all of us have seen where we're shopping for a pair of shoes or whatever it is, and then we go onto some news site and, oh, there's an ad for that exact pair of shoes, and now it's 5% off. The level of data online is just, it's shocking how much data they're collecting. We might not see it sort of quite as directly because we're not seeing our name on it, but it's still being targeted us in exactly the same way. And that's how it is these days. We can't get away from that. One of the most impressive examples that I saw is, I think this was maybe last year, the year before, Target they'd sent a mailing to someone, like a direct mail to someone, and it was a younger woman, and she was very offended because it was all about baby stuff. And she's like, I don't have a kid. Why are you sending this to me? Sure enough, about a month later, she was pregnant. Because Target had been able to identify, based on her purchasing history, she was probably pregnant. She wasn't quite, but she ended up being pregnant about a month later, even though she was really offended at the time. Because she's like, why would you send me this? Like, it's not related to me at all. Little did she know that, yeah, Target knew more about her than she even knew, yeah. And that's just an example too, because they look at her purchasing habits in store, and then they send her a piece of mail, which helps them sort of break through the clutter. Now she's got her coupons, which she was offended by, but which she could then go and use in store, which who knows, maybe she did in this case because she found out she was pregnant. But yeah, so I mean, that's sort of one example that I've heard of, but I think there's lots like that where the amount of information that like Google, any other company knows about us is shocking. And they may not know our name, but they don't necessarily need to know that either, because they can still target stuff to us directly online without even having that. If they have our information, then they can now mail us something or send us an email, whatever it is. But there's a lot happening that we don't even see, yeah. Exactly, yeah. I mean, yeah, you might get 1 or 2 gifts through email, but you're more likely to be able to get, whether it's 50 or 100 or more, through direct mail, so you'll bring in a lot more. And yes, we don't quite have as good of tracking. It's very easy with email because you've got that instant tracking. Okay, 30% of people opened it. We do know how many people responded, and so that's how we'll always do our tracking is, okay, we sent out, let's say it's 5,000 pieces, how many came back, how did that work for us? And then we can use that as a comparison. So we don't know how many people opened it, but we can use that. And the other thing that you can use, which is maybe not as kind of advantageous, but you can look at the number of complaints that you get, because if you're getting complaints, well, people saw it first of all, and they're complaining because they care at least enough to make that phone call or send an email, whatever it is. So that's another tool that you can use. We used to work with one organization, and they send out a very premium heavy mailing, so like lots of like cards and address labels, et cetera, et cetera. And they would know within 2 days how successful their direct mail campaign was going to be, because they judged it off the number of complaints. And if they didn't get enough complaints, they knew it wouldn't work, because they didn't rile people up enough. So they would actually, like literally, if they didn't get that level of complaints, they know it's a failure, because they didn't annoy enough people to know that many more would respond. So that's one thing as well, which obviously we don't want to get lots of complaints, but like I say, if somebody's complaining, they actually care, and they want to make sure you're using your resources wisely. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And oftentimes when we have a chance, if it's on the phone, to talk to them, we can let them know, hey, you know what, it's not nearly as expensive as you thought, and we actually raised this much money because of it, and now they understand more, and it's actually an opportunity to ask for a gift as well. So complaints aren't always bad. They can be quite useful in figuring out how things are working for us. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so with most of our clients, we'll run sort of their annual direct mail campaigns, which could be anywhere from 6 to 15 mailings, depending on the organization. And so we'll coordinate all of the copy and strategy behind that, and then we'll do the production as well, and then send it off, and then they just receive all the gifts back. Yeah. Next thing I'll talk about is crowdfunding. All right, so let me ask you guys one question. So how many of you have supported yourself some kind of crowdfunding initiative, whether that's a personal support page or something on Kickstarter? How many of you have done that personally? Just about everybody, that's great. How many of you have done some kind of crowdfunding effort for your organization? And was it successful?
It was very successful.
Wonderful, yes. Yeah. That's a perfect example too, because the thing with crowdfunding, there's hundreds of different platforms out there. There's a lot of different things in this space. I think increasingly, like more and more, we're seeing sort of the really personal crowdfunding. Like we had on, anybody who's local on Broadway, there was the African drum store that burned down a few days ago. It was the next morning for sure. I don't know if it was within hours, but it was only less than 12 hours later, there was already a crowdfunding page set up to help them recover some of those costs. So I think that's one thing that we're seeing more and more, is that people are using it, or people who get sick overseas. I've seen a lot of that where they're funding to help cover medical bills or whatever it is. And people do support that, because when you have, and yours is a good example, when you have a really specific cause and people can see what the benefit is going to be, that's when they're going to support it. So Ice Bucket Challenge, how many people participated in that in some way? A few of us, yeah. So that was a couple years ago now. That's sort of like the all-time greatest crowdfunding. The interesting thing about that one is ALS didn't even start it themselves. It was done just by somebody online who started this challenge. ALS almost messed it up, because within 3 days they tried to patent it or trademark it, whatever it was, which just got a huge uproar. They're like, okay, never mind, we'll just let it go. And they raised hundreds of millions of dollars because of it. They missed a really huge opportunity, because they had all of these new donors who came in just randomly, essentially. They didn't really do much at all with it. And for anybody who was part of it, who made a donation, have you seen anything from them since? Yeah, and then they've done lots of amazing research for sure, but they really missed a huge opportunity, because they had these donors just handed to them, but they weren't prepared to be able to leverage that. They didn't have anything set up so they could actually use that and continue to build these donors. And at this point now, it's kind of too late. Like if they'd actually been talking, they have everyone's email, first of all, because it's all online, sending out email updates about what's been happening, and here's some of the great advances, et cetera, et cetera. Send mail to those who they had mailing addresses for. They had a real opportunity, but I think they were just overwhelmed with all the money they had that they didn't know what to do. So they just used it wisely, which is great, but they missed an opportunity for possibly funding their organization forever if they'd put out messages, and we'll talk later about monthly giving, legacy giving, that type of thing. Now, we'll often get asked, like, oh, we want to create the next Ice Bucket Challenge. First of all, you're not going to do that. If you try to do it, it's likely going to fail anyways. You really just have to kind of go with it. Like in this case, they didn't create it, it just happened, and they went with it. So I think really you just have to be ready. Yes, you can set up specific things, but you can't expect if you set up whatever crowdfunding initiative, it's going to be the Ice Bucket Challenge, because it's not. There's likely never going to be anything like that again. The only other one that was kind of close that I know of is the No Makeup Selfie. Which in the UK was actually a huge fundraising thing. And it raised, I think, like 8 or 10 million pounds in the UK. When it got to Canada, it was kind of just for fun. Nobody really even knew there was a fundraising kind of angle behind that. People were just doing it and tagging their friends. But in the UK, it was really big on the fundraising. So sometimes the message can get lost, too, because people will interpret it or just choose to use it in a different way. And what's next? Who knows? I mean, there's lots of different things that are happening all the time. And really, you just have to sort of roll with it. I mean, right now, we've got sort of the Me Too thing, which is happening. Obviously, totally different, but still really important about how quickly things can kind of catch on and people latch on to whatever that is. But it usually doesn't last that long either. Hopefully, the Me Too thing sticks around a bit longer, because it's obviously an important discussion. But I think, yeah, you never know what it's going to be, and you just have to be ready to sort of move with it.
Sorry, what's Me Too?
It's about the like sexual harassment and stuff. So like women who have been like sexually harassed in whatever way are just posting Me Too as their status. There was a celebrity, I think last week, who had said if all the women in the world who have been like sexually harassed could just do it, and now like there's literally probably millions of women that have done it. Just full of it, yeah. Which is, like I say, it's a really important discussion. But just, yeah, who knows? We'll have to see how long that sticks around. But just being ready to sort of, and this one's not one you want to leverage in any kind of fundraising. It's just important for the message. But just being ready when something like the Ice Bucket Challenge happens to be able to jump on it. Yeah. So I'll show one example here. This is from the Tyee. So a couple of things I want to highlight here. So to make a really successful crowdfunding campaign, first of all, you need something specific. So if it's funding a salary, that's really specific, and if people can see the benefits, that's really helpful as well. So on this one, you see right in the middle there, we haven't, I think this was from a couple years ago maybe, but we have until May 30th to raise $25,000 to bring this project to life. So really specific, here's the amount of money that we have to make, here's the date that we have to do it by, and then there's lots more information about what's going to happen if they hit the goal. So really that's the key. If you want to make it successful, you've got to have something that's specific. You can't just say, we need money. Well, okay, everybody needs money, but what do you need money for? What's that going to do? And the other important thing is, how is my donation of $25, $50, $100 going to make an impact on that? If you, like with hospital foundations, if they're trying to buy a new $2 or $3 million MRI, a $25 gift doesn't seem very valuable to that. That's a very minuscule gift. But $25 or $50 into $25,000, well, that's a chunk of it. That seems more useful. So just making sure you try to break it down so it's not this huge goal, it's this small goal. Help us get to this small goal, right? And so again, more of what there, she needs your help, really specific. Here's the person who is doing the fundraising. So again, build that one-to-one connection. If you can do that, and that's sort of a general principle as well, if you're able to build that direct connection, it's going to be a lot more effective because people help other people. They don't help big things. Like if you go out and say, we need to help 5 million starving kids in Africa. Well, okay, yes, maybe you do, but one donor can't do that. One donor can help one child, right? And if you have now 5 million donors, well, mission accomplished, right? But really breaking it down so they can see sort of that direct one-to-one connection, and it's not this big pot and people don't really understand where the money is going. So yeah, they did reach their goal, 25,410. Once they did, they're now looking at, and this was it was for, I think it was a kids, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like a kids project. And so what does the future hold for our kids? So now showing the impact of, okay, we've reached our goal. Now here's what we're going to be able to accomplish because of what you've helped us do. And then they have the ties of newspapers or online news for the most part. And so now they're able to share the thank you back through their site, which again just helps to bring the whole thing together. You see the same woman there. So really just trying to make all those pieces work together. So it's not just one thing happening over here and something different here. Really focus it in on whatever that goal is and really make sure you push and give updates along the way as well. I think on... which one is it? I think it's hard to read here, but on this one they talk about how much of the goal they've accomplished, and I think that one says something like, "In only 3 days, we've already gotten 25% of our goal. Will you help us push to the end?" And same thing when you get closer. Once you've got 80, 90%, let people know that because people always want to help it to the finish. So if you say we're already 80% of the way there, we just need that last $5,000, people are going to be a lot more inclined to help finish that off because it just feels like you're doing that $50 or $100 is doing that much more to push it to the end. So I think it's good too if you have maybe a major donor who might be interested in kind of starting a bit of a seed funding for it. So you might almost already start off at 10 or 15 or 20% accomplished because you've got one donor who said, oh yeah, I want to support this thing. And you're like, well, instead of just writing a check, could you give it specifically to this so that we can help make it look like it's already kind of getting close to the finish line. This is another one, just more of a funny one that was set up a number of years ago for my boss, Harvey. This was in support of Oxfam. And so, well, you guys don't know Harvey, but he talks a lot. So this was set up to keep him silent. So I think he would stay silent for 120 hours, 5 full days if the money was raised. I believe his wife ended up donating about 50% of it. So it was successful mostly because of that. But again, you can have fun with it too. This is certainly for a good cause. But I think there's different ways. If you've got somebody who's fairly well known, and many of his friends definitely chipped in to support as well, there's different ways you can do it. So again, really specific though. There's more about sort of the specific work that was happening in Somalia in this case. But the more specific you can be and have a little fun with it as well. It doesn't have to be sort of all tied up and kind of very corporate. You can do different things because yeah, it's really more about being social and finding ways to get the message out there. The Tyee one is through, I don't know which site it was done through, but no, they did use one of the, I don't know if it's GoFundMe or a different one, but they did use one of those sites to set up the platform for them, which is totally fine. Some of them are better than others. Some of them charge quite a bit in terms of fees. Some of them, like Indiegogo is one that we'll often use for our clients. I think they've changed the name. What do they call it now? I think the new name. If you search Indiegogo, it'll still come up. They've changed the name of their platform now. But that's one that the fees are very reasonable. GoFundMe is another example, which I think is pretty fair in terms of the fees.
They were like 15%.
Are they that high? I thought, for some reason, I thought they were, maybe I'm thinking of a different one. There's a lot of platforms out there. Like I say, Indiegogo or whatever. I think it's called Generosity. I think that's what it's called now. They're very reasonable in terms of the fees. So yeah, do your research as well, because if you're doing it, some of them will be totally free for certain types of organizations or certain types of fundraisers. So it's worth looking around because they're all fairly similar and there's a lot of them. I wouldn't do it on Kickstarter because that's really more for kind of products and kind of entrepreneurs, but there's lots of ones that are more tailored to charity. There's actually a local organization as well called Chimp. I don't know if anybody knows them. They have a really good platform as well, and we recommend them quite a bit. And they're local, which is nice too. So certainly lots of options out there, and most of them are going to do fairly similar things. But sometimes, I don't know, for your organization, for example, you might want to make sure that you can accept US funds as well, depending on if you want to do something cross-border. So some might be better for that than others. So I can't say that one platform is the best because it really depends on the organization. Yeah, you don't want to. You can't do one every single month. You definitely want to use it sparingly, and you really want to make sure there is something specific. So you're not just doing it just because you've got a real specific, tangible target. Here's what we need to accomplish right now, and make sure, like I said, you have the time limit on there as well, so that we need to do it by X date. But yeah, no, I wouldn't do it on an ongoing basis. You want it maybe twice a year would probably be the most you'd want to try it, because the other thing is you're going to get the similar kind of donors who are going to respond to it, and so they're not going to respond to every single one. So they might do it once, they might do it again, but if you do it too often, then they'll kind of get, oh, they're doing it again, I'm done with it now, right? So really try to keep it on something that's really special. I think if anybody is a donor or follows them, Dogwood Initiative, again, another local organization, they do a really good job of it. They do a lot of work around politics and reform, like social reform and whatnot, and they do a really good job with some of the campaigns where they're like, we really want to get this billboard out to talk about the bad things that Christy Clark has done. Will you help us generate the money we need to have that billboard up during the election, that type of thing. So just being flexible and knowing this could be an opportunity to jump on it. Totally, yeah. I mean, those are going to be probably different than your sort of regular donors. And so certainly, yeah, you want to make sure you're reporting back on the success with the project so they can see that you've made an impact. And you want to continue to engage with them to hopefully get them to become regular donors. And lots of different ways to do that. The stewardship and sort of the impact is really important because usually it's going to skew a bit younger, and really the younger you are, the more you want to really see what that result was. But certainly that's a great pool of people. Yes, they are donors, but they're not sort of our traditional donors who are supporting on a regular basis. They were maybe just interested in the one project, or, I mean, a lot of the stuff, like if you look at peer-to-peer, where it's friends asking friends, the friends are giving to their friend. And many times they don't even know what organization it is. They're just supporting them in the run or the whatever it is. But they don't even really know what the organization is. But still a huge opportunity to talk to those friends and share with them more about the organization so they can learn and then hopefully become regular donors as well. Yeah, Giving Tuesday is a tricky one. I mean, I think it's somewhat valuable in that there's sort of this day of giving, and every year Giving Tuesday increases. But I think as well, the number of things that are happening on Giving Tuesday is increasing. So if you're going to do something like this, I'd almost have it like end on Giving Tuesday. Right? So focus on, do like, say, a month-long campaign, and then that's kind of the last day if you need it. But hopefully you've already hit your target. Or on the flip side, you could sort of launch it starting on Giving Tuesday and then run it to the end of the year, as an example. So I think it's probably too short, and there's so much happening, it's hard to really get that sort of attention share. But you could tie it in, or maybe it's the midpoint, and then that gives you sort of a built-in, like, oh, on Giving Tuesday, we're 60% of the way there. Help us get that last 40%. So I think there's ways to tie it in, but I wouldn't necessarily try to do like we need to raise $10,000 today, just because I think it's becoming a really kind of full day of everything that's happening. And a lot of, I mean, on Giving Tuesday specifically, a lot of times you might be better off to send something the day before, the day after, just because of how much is now happening on that day. And yes, there's lots of money being raised, but there's also that much more stuff that's going out to raise that money. So yeah, I mean, that could potentially be valuable, but I think it would depend on what other organizations are in the drop-down, because if you have a bunch of larger, well-known organizations, they're not going to pick yours because they don't really know who you are. So, I mean, I think anything you can be doing to pull money in is worthwhile. I'm not sure whether you get access to the information of those donors after. No, yeah. So, and I think that's one thing. Yeah, and I think that's one thing with a lot of platforms. Yes, there's Canada Helps is another one that a number of organizations will use, which is a great platform. But the tricky thing with that is donors can easily just opt out of sending their contact information, which, okay, we got $20, but now what? So sure, it's worthwhile to be able to bring some of that money in, but I think really at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're able to collect information about them, because if we don't do that, then it's just a one-off, yeah. And I mean, going back. It doesn't cost us. No, so it's certainly worthwhile, but I think if you're looking at opportunities like that, trying to find ones where you can still get that information so that you've had a chance to do something with it in the future. Yeah. Okay, monthly giving. So how many of your organizations have a monthly giving program set up? So I think monthly giving is a really valuable area. We'll go through a number of different things. One of the things with monthly giving is usually you're going to see the annual income increase. Because you've got donors giving that regular gift, even if it's $10 or $15 a month, that still equates to $120 or $170 a year, which is quite good in terms of the money that they're giving. So you'll usually see your income go up quite a bit. I mentioned Amnesty International earlier. I think they have about 35,000 monthly donors in Canada. They're not even the largest. I think there's a couple organizations who have over 100,000 monthly donors just in Canada, which is huge, and we're probably not going to get there with most of our organizations, but they've focused on building that up over time because they know that's a really sustainable source for them. And those monthly donors are going to renew at probably 90–95%. Yes, some of them might pass away, or maybe their financial situation changes, so there's going to be some reasons that they drop off. But generally, they're not going to just decide to change. And I think the longer they give, the more likely they'll stay for that much longer. I know Harvey, as an example, he's been a monthly donor to Oxfam for 40+ years at this point, because he joined when he started volunteering with them when he was 18 or 19, and he's continued that ever since. And he's had friends who he's signed up when he was back in university, and they're still giving as well. So again, they've got a 35–40 year history, and they're never going to cancel. So the younger you can get somebody in, the better it is, because they're likely going to continue to give for life. Usually we see that the annual value will, the long-term value will be somewhere between $1,000 to $3,000 per monthly donor, which is really quite huge, and that's just looking at the monthly value as well. That's not considering whether they're going to give additional legacy gifts or anything else in the future. But there's certainly a lot of value in it, and it's worthwhile even starting on a smaller scale, just making sure that donors are aware that that's a way that they can give to you. It also gives you a chance for better relationships as well, because you can develop those relationships over time. You don't need to be sending them stuff as regularly, but you can talk to them on the phone, you can invite them to events, you can find other ways to get them further engaged with your cause, which is going to help further that relationship and make sure it lasts long into the future. Most of our organizations will send an annual receipt in February. Yeah, so they'll do the annual receipt for the 12 months. It's not really cost effective to do the one-by-one. Some donors might want it, but really you can just say, no, if you're going to be a monthly donor, we're going to give you one receipt at the end of the year. Because it's a lot more effective that way. So there's also good potential for savings, because once you've got them established as a monthly donor, you don't have to be asking them all the time. So you're not going to have to send them mail as regularly. You're not going to have to worry about making phone calls, spending more time, because they're already giving on that regular basis. Certainly there is still going to be opportunities where you might want to reach out to them. Maybe you are doing a crowdfunding campaign and you want to say, hey, I know you're already a monthly supporter, but I thought you might be really interested in this one. And they may or may not support it, but I think there's still opportunities to make additional asks, and most of them are very open to that. Again, I wouldn't do it every single month, but if you got 1 or 2 times a year where you've got maybe, and we'll talk later about year-end, maybe it's the year-end campaign, and you want to make sure they have an opportunity to donate to that. So there's still opportunities to ask them again, but you can save a lot of money by not having to go out as regularly, because you know you've got that money coming in on a regular basis. And then possibly as well with the tax receipting, if you have a donor who gives, I don't know, let's say 4 gifts throughout the year, let's say they give 4 gifts of $25, so you get $100, and you send them 4 tax receipts. Now you're getting 12 gifts of $10. So first of all, you're getting more, and you just send that one tax receipt. So there's savings there as well, where you don't have to do that stuff, and it just saves admin time as well, and not having to process the gifts as regularly. You've got the predictability, which I chatted about earlier. You know that money is going to come in, and you know most of those donors are going to continue to give for a long time. And once you've got a program established, you'll be able to determine what percentage that is. Let's say it's 90% year over year. So you'll know the next year you're going to get this much, and so you want to make sure you bring more donors in to bring it back up and hopefully continue to grow it. But it's a very predictable stream of income for the long term. Donors also are likely going to stay a lot longer. So you'll have them hopefully for 30, 40 years, possibly more. But you're usually going to keep donors around longer. And once they're on it, I think donors they feel bad about canceling. So unless they have a really good reason, they're going to keep doing it. And I think a lot of them don't even really notice so much. It's $10 or $15, even if it's $25 coming off their credit card each month or their bank statement. They don't really notice it that much. One thing I will say just on that is it's always better if you can to get them on some kind of direct debit via their bank, because we very, very rarely change our bank, but we will change credit cards quite frequently. So credit cards are always going to have some of that that cancellation rate built in, and many times you'll be able to call and reactivate them. But if you get somebody's banking details for the direct debit, they're rarely ever going to change that. It's just much more consistent over time. Well, and credit card fraud is continue to increase. There's more and more of that where people are having to change cards because their previous one got scammed. So I think and yes, most owners will be able to update that information, but now that's just one more step. Now you've got to, first of all, it gets declined. Okay, there might be a charge coming back from the bank, who knows? But then you've got to call them and get the new details and get it reactivated. So you might get charged and lose out on a month of gifts because you didn't make that call soon enough to, yeah. 100%. I think that comes down to resources, though. Like using Amnesty as an example again, they have 4 full-time staff on their monthly team. And so they're watching it on a regular basis. They know which ones are coming up. They're making proactive phone calls. But if you don't have somebody who can spend that time and those resources, it can be a bit tougher to be able to manage that effectively, because usually you've got to reach out by phone. You might be able to send them an email, but whether they see the email, whether they respond to it is a different question. So phone's really how you want to be reaching out in that way. But it just comes down to resources, whether you can make that happen. And then one of the other things with monthly giving is, okay, so they've joined $10 a month. There's still lots of opportunities to upgrade them over time. We'll usually try to at least once a year make some kind of an upgrade ask, whether that's through the mail, whether it's through email, through phone, whatever it is. Always worth asking them to give a little bit more. Even if it's an extra $2 a month, that probably seems very small to them, and that's kind of the goal. But that's $25 a year. That probably means, I don't know, $300, $400, $500 over time just from that $2. So even that can make a big difference as well. So, and not being afraid, again, yes, they are giving monthly, but you're not going to scare them off by asking them to give more. They may choose not to, and that's fine. But with some campaigns, like telephone campaigns we've run, we've been able to get 20% of the monthly donors to upgrade their support, which is really huge if you look at the long-term effects of that. And okay, a couple of them are going to cancel, but the other thing you have to keep in mind is some of them may have kind of been looking for like a reason to cancel. So they've been like, oh, I really want to get off this one. Like I don't have the money, or I don't really kind of care for this organization as much now. And so they're kind of waiting. Oh, they called me. Oh yeah, I hate phone calls. Cancel my monthly membership or whatever it is. But some of that is just because they were looking for that reason. So don't feel like, oh, you did this thing and now you've caused it. They were probably looking for an out already. If you get a whole bunch of cancellations, okay, maybe that's a different concern. But from what we've found is they're definitely open to receiving additional asks and being asked to upgrade their support as well. And they know they can make the choice not to. They don't feel they have to make it. So convenience is another big one. For the donor, for one, because they don't have to worry about making their donations on a regular basis. But also for you, and going back to the consistency as well, because you know what's coming in. You don't have to worry about this big stack of checks coming back that you have to process. It's just going to come in on a regular basis. So it's certainly convenient on both sides, and one of the big benefits. So this is an example from Oxfam, just looking at how to find new monthly donors. So on the left over here, so you see they've got first gift. So we've got a number of different channels that they may have made that first gift through. So the first month, we're going to send them a thank you. Again, make sure you have that impact there. Make sure you show them, here's what we've done with that donation that you gave us. We've got a a mailing that goes out that focuses specifically, it's called Share Plan for Oxfam, on joining their share plan and some of the benefits, which might include convenience and decreased costs to the organization, et cetera. Month 3, you've got a newsletter, again, coming back to that impact. So sort of educate them a little bit about the program now, show them more about the impact that the donors are making, why their monthly support is so important, possibly what specifically share plan donors have helped to fund as well. Moving along to month 5, so then we send them the sort of the best direct mail appeal that we have, just to try to get that second donation. So we know that works really well. It's a really strong case. Send them that to try to get a response there. Send them another one with another really strong appeal that we've done in the past that we know resonated well. Then move on again, newsletter, so making sure to bring that stewardship back in. And then one thing you can do in month 12 there, you can say, since you joined us 12 months ago, here's all the great things that we've accomplished because of your support. And that's another really good opportunity to be able to ask for a monthly donation and be able to say, now will you support us on a regular basis so we can continue to make all these great accomplishments year after year. So I think all the way along you want to be asking for that monthly donation, always making sure there's an option for it, even if it's a newsletter, making sure you've got some kind of reply device in there where they see the monthly give as an option and that's something they can send back. But I think really key is bringing that stewardship in, because you don't just want to ask. You want to make sure you show here's the things that have been done and here's the extra value of joining as a monthly donor and why that really helps to push things forward. So a few questions that you might get from donors who might be considering it is why your organization? For most of our donors, there's many other charities they likely support as well, so why should I make a monthly donation to your organization? And I think always want to focus on what that's going to do in the future. And it's going to provide stability, it's going to provide consistency, it's going to make sure that we can plan for the long term so that we can accomplish these projects because we know we've got that money coming in. So I think that's a really big thing, and so making sure that's there to really show here's the value of joining as a monthly donor, so they're not just saying, oh, that's just an inconvenience for me because I gotta do that, I gotta worry about that every month, right? But showing them here's really the value and why you should give it to our organization. The next one, and this goes back to the impact, is will my gift make a difference? This is a big question just generally, I think, for donors, but really want to show them, yes, your gift will make a difference. Here's how donors like you have made a difference, and here's how you will make a difference in the future. Always really effective to bring that messaging in, and that's just going to make everything you do a lot easier if you're really able to show here's the difference that you're making, because that's what donors are expecting to see. They want to know what impact they're going to have, and so making sure that you show them that. And if we've got your example, $35 a month will help us accomplish this exact thing, which is really good, specific, and they can see, well, obviously that's making a difference because that's what I'm helping to fund. Making it easy, super important. We want it to be convenient. If it's not convenient for them, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of it. So really want to make sure it's easy for them. Some organization, or some donors, I should say, will actually send in 12 post-dated checks to an organization. Now, that's not that easy, but that's what that donor wants to do. So you know what? If that's easy for them, let them do that, right? So there's different things that you can do to make sure that they can kind of give in whatever way makes sense for them. Some of them might want to do it online, some of them might want to do it through the mail, just making sure that whatever channel is convenient for them, they're able to make the gift through that channel. They don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. There was one organization we worked with a few years ago, and they, on the reply form, you basically sent in the monthly confirmation, and then they sent you back another package so that you could actually provide your details. And we were like, what the heck? Like, that is not convenient at all for anybody. So we were able to get them to shift that, but stuff like that, like, there's no reason for those kind of processes to be in place, and that's just making it hard for donors, not easy, and that's really defeating the purpose of why we want to start building towards a monthly giving program. So this is one example, which is probably fairly typical actually for a lot of the donors we'll be talking to. So we've got Cindy. She gives $1,000 a year to her 10 favorite charities. Now she might have 20 charities, and so she gives to 10 charities one year and then a different 10 charities the next year. If we can get her to join as a monthly donor, let's say we sign her up at $25 a month, that means, and she'll join ours and one other at $25 a month. So that's $300 for each of those organizations. That means she only has $400 left for her other nonprofits, which means they're probably only getting, I don't know, $50 each now instead of the $100 they were getting originally. and now we're getting 300 instead of the 100 we're getting originally. So that's why monthly giving can be so valuable, because even a small gift, like in this example, even if she gave $10 or $15 a month, that's still more than she was contributing before. And so you can get people to give a lot more because it seems so small. $10, $15, $25 a month is not that much. And a lot of times they don't really do the math and they're not thinking, whoa, that's 300 a year. They're thinking, oh, 25 a month, yeah, I can afford that. They do the math when they're figuring it out, but they don't think about how much of a difference that makes. So just a good example to say, yeah, all of our donors are given to other organizations as well, and we want to make sure that we can go in there and get that monthly donation, because if we don't, somebody else might, and now we might get less from that donor. So causes that benefit the most: emergencies, children, animals, overseas aid, religion, hospitals. So if we put all that together, it's an emergency. Young children and our animals overseas need a religious hospital today for just $27 a month. Now, we might not be able to get that specific in our ask, but if we can, that much the better. So yeah, specificity, certainly really important. And the 27 there is done intentionally because 25 might seem kind of fake, right? We pick the number. 27, that seems really specific, and it adds authenticity to it when you have an actual amount there. So certainly 10 is kind of a normal amount, so sometimes you will, but if you've got a specific program, don't round your numbers off. Give it the exact number. Even if it's 34 instead of 35, you might get $1 less per month, but if you sign up 10% more donors because they see that that's true, you're going to get a lot more money in the long run. So really want to tie it back if we can. So try to find something specific. Maybe it's different projects. So $10 a month will do this, 25 will do this, 31 will do this. You always want to, when you're doing this, in some ways you want to make the lower value ones seem a little less desirable, because you don't want to make them, oh, that's awesome, I can do that for $10. They want to be, that seems okay. Ooh, that's nice. Whoa, that's a really cool option I can do for 31, because that'll help to move them up, because they see that that one's a much more sort of interesting option and something they'd be really keen to support. So there's ways you can structure it as well to try to kind of convince people that, hey, yeah, a higher giving amount is going to be, well, more interesting for you because you're supporting this, but also more effective for the organization. So this is just one example from World Vision. Probably a little bit hard to see. World Vision has obviously done a really good job with monthly giving over time with their child sponsorship. One of the key things you see down here, again, sponsor one of these children today. It's not help all of our work, it's help one child. And I just use this example because, and same thing here, because they sort of kind of started the whole thing. So 389,000 Canadians. I don't know if that's still a true number. This is a little bit older, but that's how many people they had who were sponsoring children. And it's that one-to-one. It's showing the specificity. Now this is not great, but 47,000 children like these need a child sponsor like you. That seems like a lot, but when you say you've already got 389,000, that's only 10% extra. So it's more reasonable for them, but still want to make sure it's that one-to-one. And I think here it looks like 35 a month, so same as what you guys have there. That's what it costs. So they've decided that works for people, and maybe that's the case for you as well. But some people might look at that and go, whoa, I can't afford 400 a year, so I just won't do it, right? But you want to still have that specificity. So if there's a lower amount, I think that's really valuable for sure. And just a chart here, might be a little bit hard to see, but this is just looking at the long-term value of 50 new monthly donors. So at the top here we have 50. Over time you're going to lose some of them. So at the end we only have 15 of them left. First year profit was about $5,000, but if you look down at the end, total profit from 50 new monthly donors in this example was about $42,000. So that's really valuable. We only have 15 of them still giving, but many of them will have upgraded over time. You see the average gift goes from 12 up to 25. So you will have them upgrade over time. So you might have a few less. There's always going to be some natural attrition. We can't stop that. But 50 monthly donors in this case worth over $40,000 after 10 years. So just a really valuable stream and just really consistent in terms of what you're going to be able to do with it. Anybody familiar with the Marmot Recovery Foundation on the island? Okay, so it's a really small organization. We've actually worked with them for a number of years. They actually have a very robust fundraising program. Basically, they are working to save the Vancouver Island marmot. And so that's been their goal. They were almost extinct about, I think it was about 10 years ago. They almost actually went extinct, and they were able to nurse them back to what's a relatively good population. I think Last winter they had some issues, I think probably because it was so cold, but they've been able to actually get them back to a point where they're, I don't even believe they're endangered anymore. They're still, they need to be watched, but they've been able to build up the population, which is really great. And like I say, they've got a great fundraising program. So they have about 7,300 single gift donors. They have about almost 1,200 monthly donors, which is a pretty strong percentage, and that's something that we've worked with them and they've worked hard on building up over time. Average monthly gift, $13, again, kind of in line with what we'll normally expect to see. And so that means $155 that they get from their monthly donors on an annual basis. If we compare that with the $25 they get from their single gift donors, we've got a better than 6-to-1 ratio on what they're bringing in through their monthly gifts. So 25 is quite low, but it's an organization where you get a lot of younger people and people who might not be like traditional charity donors. So that's going to skew a little bit lower. But really what we're looking at there is that 6-to-1 ratio of how much more they're raising through those monthly donors. And they have about 15% of their file, might even closer to 20 now, which is monthly, which is really good. And just again, helps them with the sustainability and making sure that they can be prepared for long into the future. Any other questions on monthly giving? Okay. So how many of you have some type of legacy giving program established at your organization? Okay, a couple of you. And have you started to receive legacy gifts as well? They've all put the organization in the, right, so you haven't received any actual gifts yet. Okay, yeah. Yes, good. Yeah, so legacy giving, we'll talk about a few different things here. So basically we're talking about people giving a gift in their will. That's the most common way. I've got a slide and a couple here. That's what donors are going to be most comfortable with and most familiar with. So I might say legacy giving or bequest giving, or there's a number of different terms that we'll use. But when we're talking to a donor, it's a gift in a will. That's 90–95% of the gifts you will get. Yes, there's other ways they can give, but that's how we want to focus the messaging because that's going to be what's most effective for them. So this is probably one of my favorite legacy examples of all time. Some of you might have seen it before. Yeah. So this is something that Greenpeace in the UK did. It was actually on coasters at bars. So not really your traditional market, but something that is going to catch your eye and something that's really effective as well. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. I just always love showing this example because it's just so unique in terms of the way they message it. But yeah, this one, like I say, if you ask people about whether they're interested in making a gift to charity in their will, 23% are interested now and 12% are never interested. If you ask them about making a bequest gift, about half are interested now, and more of them will never be interested. Now, to us, these two are the exact same thing. But to the donor, those are very different things because they don't really know what a bequest is. So just making sure that when we are speaking with donors, we always talk about a gift in my will, because that's what donors are going to understand, and that's what's going to make sure they're not never be interested because they don't know what that is. So this is just an example. This was for last year, so it would have been 2016, for the legacy income that's being raised. Now, we've got some larger charities here, Canadian Cancer, Heart and Stroke, 20 million plus. At the bottom there, we've got Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, which is local in Ontario. They're still bringing in about 5 million. So just showing this to show you that there is really good potential in legacy gifts. And this is just a sampling of the organizations as well. And even for smaller organizations, there's a great potential here. As boomers get older, this is a way that they are certainly looking at sort of leaving their legacy, if you will. And so they're looking at which charities they want to leave in their will. And so you really want to make sure that they're aware that your organization, first of all, will accept that, and that you make it easy for them to do that if that's something they're interested in. So what we'll normally do is we'll include a survey along with it. And we'll ask them a few questions just about the organization, what first made them support the organization, why they like to support the organization, sort of a few questions to kind of make them feel good about the organization. And then we'll ask them specifically, have you included us in your will? Would you be interested in more information? Would you like some information in a few years? That type of thing. And so just ask them how they would like to get more information. Many of them won't respond, which is fine. At least now they know that's an option for them, even if they don't respond. Some of them will come back and say, yes, please give me more information, and you can follow that up with a phone call or maybe meet them in person, depending on what it is. But really the key is just making sure that they're aware of that being an option. Yeah. And we'll usually, when we're doing that, we'll always have a letter that goes as well that is signed by somebody. It could be the CEO or executive director, or it could just be a donor who has left a legacy. And so they can talk specifically about why they thought that was valuable for them and why they chose to make that decision. So in your case, maybe it's from the chair of the board or one of the other board members talking about why they've made that decision to leave a gift in their will. Yeah. So this one looks at the age when people sign their final will. People will make a number of changes to their wills normally, especially as people, I think usually only about, I think it's 25–30% of people actually have a will. It is gradually increasing. How many people in here have one, just out of curiosity? Okay, so we're maybe a bit higher than average, which is good. But so yeah, people will change it over time, but 80 plus is when 76% of people make their will. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's when you want to start the conversation, because they might have made decisions before then. So really you want to be talking to people in their 60s and 70s. That's when you really want to be engaging them, making sure they know about the impact that your organization's making, because when they do make that final decision, when they're 80 plus, you're going to be one of the organizations they choose to include. But at the same point, we only have 13% who do it pre-70, so certainly we can talk to those people, but it's not going to be as beneficial until we actually can talk to them when they're more in that stage of being able to make that gift. So one of the essential components is obviously a donor base. You're not going to be able to generate a lot of legacies if you don't have some established base of people. Like I said earlier, they don't necessarily have to have been supporting you for a long time, but you have to have donors there or you're not going to be able to make that ask for that. So that's just one thing to really, and that's again why we want to focus on sort of building up that kind of the bottom of the pyramid there, because that gives us people who we can talk to about possibly making gifts like this in the future. So things that need to drive your legacy program. First, you need an appealing mission. You need to be able to demonstrate why making a legacy gift will help prolong into the future. You need to make sure that there's some focus there. Generally, they're not going to just support all of your efforts. They're going to want to know that it's going to go towards this specific thing, whether it's building schools or whatever it is, that you're going to continue that for the future, not just we need you to support our organization forever. Like that's not really a compelling message, so you really want to make sure it's focused on something. Investment is key. Yes, you might get some just by doing nothing, but if you actually spend a little bit of time, spend a little bit of money, make sure you're sending out, whether it's a mailing or something else, to donors, making sure they're aware of it. It's going to cost you a little bit now, and you may not get a lot back right away, but you're going to get that back in the future. Normally, sort of 3 to 4 years from when you start making the investment is when you might start to see something coming back. So yeah, marketing is really important to that, making sure you're getting the message out there. And then, like I said, just making sure you take that long-term perspective, because it's not something that's going to generate you money right now. It really is an investment in the future, much like the gift is. So just looking at it longer term, 5, 10 years out, and then analyzing what's happened with the program. So the barriers, I think a lot of people are just afraid to ask the question because they feel like other people don't want to talk about it. And to some degree, that's fair. Yes, people don't necessarily want to talk about their death, no matter how far or soon that might be. But you can do it in the right way, where it's not something that's coming across in a really negative way. Like I say, if you do a survey, you engage them with a couple sort of more simple questions about your organization first, and then make those questions. And the mail is very, it's not going to offend anybody that much. Like, they can choose to read it, they can choose to put it away. They don't have to answer it. I think if you did it on the phone, that might be a lot more offensive for people. But once somebody comes back and says, yeah, I'd be interested in more information, they've said, yes, I'm comfortable talking about it, now you can reach out via the phone as well. So I think that's one big barrier, is people just, they feel like nobody wants to talk about it. But if you don't talk about it, you're also not going to get any gifts, which is not what we want either. So it is an important conversation to have. Investment is one too, where I think it's hard for a lot of boards to say, okay, we're going to put in, I don't know, let's say we invest $25,000 in legacy marketing to know we're going to get probably zero return for at least the first 2 or 3 years. That could be a tougher investment to make, but really it's about that long-term perspective and knowing that, yes, okay, we're going to spend some money right now, but that's going to return things for far into the future. It's kind of not dissimilar from even doing a direct mail acquisition, where, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit of money right now. Same thing with any for-profit business. There's always a new customer acquisition cost, but over time you're going to make that back by getting that second and third, and then that monthly, and then that legacy gift down the road. So I think that's a tougher sort of mindset shift, in that we have to have net revenue now, and yes, that's important for sustainability, but we also have to make those appropriate investments in the future, or make those appropriate investments now to make sure that we've got a sustainable future. So when somebody joins your legacy program, if they've told you, yes, I've left a gift in my will, or yes, I intend to, you really want to make them feel special. That's a big commitment they've made to your organization, and it shouldn't be taken lightly, so you should get to know them. You probably don't have a lot. You'll start off with 1, then 2, then a handful. It's not that hard initially to be able to make sure you can build a personal relationship with them. Make sure they feel connected, invite them to events, give them the opportunity to possibly, if you've got a new campaign coming up, let them voice their opinions on it. See what they think. They obviously really care about your organization. Everybody loves giving their opinion, so ask them about it. See what they think. See if they have any recommendations for things you do differently. And make sure you communicate with them on a regular basis too. A lot of organizations, as soon as they get that confirmation, they're like, okay, that's it. We won't say anything else to them because we don't want to offend them. But like your monthly donors, you're not going to offend them, and they actually, in many cases, probably want to hear from you. And you actually might have the opposite impact. If you just stop communicating with them, they might think, well, first of all, there's no more need, so why are they even giving a legacy gift? Or they might think that you don't care, so why are they giving a legacy gift? So you don't want to be asking them all the time, certainly not, but you want to be communicating with them, talking to them about the things that are happening, the impact the donors are making. And we'll normally go out to our legacy confirmations, usually once a year anyways, when there's a sort of a special project that they might be interested in. Because yes, they've made this commitment for the future, but that doesn't mean they don't still want to support you now, because they really care about your organization. So it's a big lost opportunity if you just say, that's it, we're not talking to them anymore, because many of them do still want to hear from you, and many of them will still give to you all the way up. And that could be 20 or 30 years that they'll continue to give to you until they eventually make that legacy gift. So in terms of getting things going, 3 key steps. First is just updating your messaging to make sure that donors know that you are open to receiving bequests. Many organizations will give sort of examples of specific wording. You can give them a codicil form if that's something that they might be interested in. So just making sure they know, first of all, that you are open to receiving it, and making sure that you're communicating how they should make that gift. So whatever the organization name should be that they're including in their will, just little things like that to make sure they at least are aware of what that you offer that as an option for them. Always worth asking for it. A lot of organizations will even just put a little checkbox on the reply forms. I'd like more information about leaving a gift to my will. Super simple. You're not going to get a whole lot of people checking it, but you know what? No harm in throwing it in there. Most people won't notice it, but some people will, and some people will want that. Now you've got a built-in pool where now you can start having those conversations, and you're going to be that much more effective once you start to do that. Another big thing is it's nice to just tell them about why it's so important, but it's even better if you can share from other people, like I say in a letter, here's why I've done it. Because then they can see somebody else, somebody who they'll look at as a peer, why they've chosen to do it, and that's going to be much more effective than you just saying, well, we need your support because we need this funding for the future, right? If they see somebody else who's very similar to them has done it, they're going to be much more likely to do it as well. So the second step, again, going back to the database, but looking for prospective bequest donors in your database and reaching out to them. Now, they can come from anywhere, but there's going to be some indicators that are going to make them more likely. If they've been supporting you for a long time, consistency is certainly a big one, even at lower levels as well. Particularly in Vancouver, where real estate is very expensive, a lot of our donors who are local anyways may be very house poor. So they may not have a lot of money right now. They may make very modest gifts all throughout their life, but they may have a $5 or $10 million estate, and they're giving you a portion of that. So don't just focus on your high value donors, because they may be in an opposite situation. Maybe they don't even own their home, so they have lots of money right now, and they may not have that much in the future. So just looking at more so the consistency and the longevity as opposed to the overall value. Monthly donors are certainly a good source as well. And if anybody's indicated an interest in it, the other thing to look at is if, for example, you know that a donor does not have any children, they're likely going to be more interested in giving money to charity because they don't necessarily have sort of that obvious somebody to give their estate to. So that's another thing if you happen to know that information. So there's lots of little things you can do to try to learn more about who might be a good prospect for you to at least begin that conversation with. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it in that way. Yeah. you might just want to ask them if they want to go for lunch and just have a conversation and let them know about this great project that you're working on. But yeah, I mean, if we know that information, there's no reason we don't want to try to leverage it, because the thing is, if we know that, other charities probably know that, and they might be doing it. And you know what, for the donor, they want to make an impact. And if they don't have children, they want to find their way to make an impact. So it shouldn't be looked at as sort of like we're targeting them. Really, we're helping them. And we're not saying you have to do this. We're saying, well, here's an option. And then they can make that choice, because that may be something that's really interesting for them and something they really want to do to sort of leave their legacy. It's very, well, it's hard initially. Once you have a program that's established, you're going to have a good idea of what you're going to receive on average per year, because you know you've built it up over 5 or 10 years and you get whatever it is. Let's say it's $1 million a year you receive in legacy gifts. Now, one year maybe it's 800,000. The next year maybe it's 1.5 million. But over time you'll get a better idea for it, because you'll never know specifically we're going to get a legacy from that donor, but you'll know on average we get 10 legacies a year, whatever it is, and you'll be able to track that over time. Yeah. So yeah, just keep in mind there's lots of different segments which could be good prospects for you, so don't try to key in just on one. There's lots of different groups. And again, once you have a program established, you may find that, I don't know, maybe 80% of your legacy donors are monthly donors. And if that's something you find out, okay, well, monthly donors is now going to be your key segment, because that's where most of them are coming. So sometimes it's harder initially because you don't know exactly where it's going to come from. But just keeping in mind there's lots of different segments there that they could come from. And like I say, loyalty is really one of the big things, because that's really going to dictate a lot of what they're likely to do in the future. So I showed this one earlier. I'll come back to it just because we've done some research around ages, and in Canada we don't usually have a lot of information about our donors. In the States it's a totally different world. They can append anything they want. They can get their birthday, they can get their kids' names, whatever they want. It's kind of crazy down there. We have privacy laws, which is good, so it's harder to be able to know somebody's age, but there's actually a lot that you can learn about most people just from their age. So I'll show you a couple examples here. What you would be seeing here is a very high peak, which would be right around the 1960s for Deborah, which that's actually how a lot of names go. They will peak very quickly. They will be popular for about 10 or 20 years, and then they will quickly fall off again. So we'll never know exactly, but Deborah, for example, 59, I think this slide's about a year old. I actually did a seminar, and I asked, there was a bigger crowd, I asked if there's anybody named Deborah, and she put up her hand and said, that's my age. I was like, well, there you go, yeah. So it's surprising how easy you can predict. So we find, in the analysis we've done, about 95% of names, you can fairly easily predict the age of that person just by the name. And this is North American based, so it's all names that we're going to be moderately familiar with. Some names here, like we see Elizabeth. This is hard to read, but this is basically like 1880s, and this is 2010. And so you see Elizabeth kind of maintains popularity over time. It's had some peaks and dips, but it's been a fairly popular name over time. I'll just see if these work. And so this one is, Victoria. So another one that is popular over time. It makes it a little bit harder to predict, but these are just a couple examples. The vast majority of names are fairly easy to predict. This one is Gertrude and Mildred. I'm sure none of us probably know anybody by either of those names, because they were most likely born around 1900. So if you have any Gertrudes or Mildreds, talk to them now. Because if they're still alive, they're very old at this point. Because I think this is about 1910, the peak, and so there's very few of those still alive.
What goes back that database?
About 1880. It starts, yeah. So yeah, so there's names like that have they're not popular anymore. There is a bit of a trend for names to kind of come back, but the thing with that is there's so many more names nowadays that there's not these big spikes anymore, because everybody's creating all these different versions of names. So in 30 years, this may not be that useful, but right now we can actually tell quite a bit just by somebody's name. And so just another one, I threw my name in here as well. So this is Ryan on the right, and that's Samantha on the left, which are both basically born somewhere in the 1980s. That's just how it is. I mean, I have probably at least 10 friends who are named Ryan, which is kind of ridiculous. But that's just the popular name. And it was #1 for 10 years, and then it's fallen off. And it has peaked up a little bit now, but it's just amazing how much consistency you can predict names with. So if you look at, like, there's lots of stuff you can look at online. If you're not sure, just check and see. If that name was popular in the 1960s, well, we don't know for sure, but most likely that's when they would have been born. So you have probably about a 10 times chance to get that right. So just something to keep in mind is that we can actually learn quite a bit from somebody's first name. We may not have the birth date info, but there's lots that can be learned from just the name alone. I've probably done that at some point. We can do it if you want. Yeah. That one, it's surprising actually how some of them, like usually it's just the Bible names that tend to be fairly consistent over time. Most of them have some type of peak to them. Yeah. And almost everyone who I've looked at, like I say, 90–95% of the time it follows true. There's always going to be outliers, and we're not trying to update our database with this person's age. We don't know that. We're trying to get an indication of, are they likely older? That's what we really want to know, because if that's the likelihood, then that's who we want to be talking to about legacy gifts.
Are you able to give us the source for that search?
Yeah, the site, I'll double check it at lunch. I think it's babynamewizard.com. I think, I'll double check it for you. And you can just plug in the name, and then it'll give you the graph, and you can see, and it'll give you the variations too, so you can see when like a different variation popped up. So, yeah. Yeah, the charts that I have are all from that site, just because they produce a nice chart. I don't know why I wasn't showing right. They have pink for the women's ones and blue for the men's ones, but and you'll see, interestingly, yeah. Some names, though, have, well, Ryan's one example, which has actually become more popular for women in recent years. And so you'll see, like, the blue chart peaking here and then the pink chart peaking here. So again, if you happen to know the gender, you can say, okay, well, because they're male or female, they're probably older or younger, depending on what it is. So I know lunch is here. Just a couple more slides on legacy giving, and then we'll take a break and do lunch. So another really important thing is tracking your actions. So making sure you have some way of recording the fact that you went out and sent them a mailing package, or you sent them an email, whatever it is. If you had a phone call, making sure you track that. Try to make any notes if they said, well, I don't know, maybe now is not the right time, but in a few years. So making sure you're tracking that type of information. Making sure if they do say, talk to me in a few years, you're following up, because they're not going to come back and ask again. So it's really on you to make sure you've got that tracked in whatever database you're using. So that's just one really important part. And then so just one last thing here. So why you should make it a priority. First of all, you create a legacy. So you're helping the donors create theirs, but you're also creating a legacy for your organization. Because if you get this established now, it's going to be a program that continues to work over time. So you're really helping to ensure your organization's success for long into the future. You're going to raise more money. You won't have a lot in sort of the first few years, but over time you will certainly have a larger revenue for your organization. And you'll have a little bit of that consistency too. It's never guaranteed, and sometimes you'll get a big outlier legacy, which really changes things, but you'll at least know that you're going to be raising more money over time. And both of those are going to help you increase organizational stability. So going back to what I talked about at the beginning, you're not relying just on one or two areas. You've now built in a third or fourth or fifth, legacy giving being one of them, where you know you've got 10% of your revenue coming from legacy giving each year, which just helps you in case one area falls down. Maybe you can do a bit more of a legacy push, and it won't be, again, immediate, but you'll have that for the future to make sure that you're balancing out all your different channels there. So I've touched on integration a few times and just of the importance of it. One of the things that we have to keep in mind today is that for most of us and for most of our donors, the way that we're going to find something online is by doing a Google search. That's just how we do it, whether it's on our computer, whether it's on our phone. We're going to just search in Google. Not many of us type in URLs anymore. So making sure you have, first of all, a strong search presence, whether that's through ads or just organically, is really important, because that'll be how we drive a lot of the traffic. And then making sure once somebody actually gets to your website, they're able to quickly complete whatever that action is that they're looking to do, whether that's donate, whether that's learn more about the organization. Just making sure that it's really simple for them to be able to get on and complete whatever that action is. So how many of you know Charity Water? I'm sure many of you, yeah. So Charity Water, really good example of really strong digital presence. The one thing that I think a lot of people find surprising about Charity Water is compared to other US organizations, they don't actually raise that much money. And a lot of that is because they're really just focused online. They really don't do a lot of stuff in other channels. They only raise, and this will be a big number compared to us, but they only raise about $40 million a year. But that compares to other similar organizations who are raising $300, $400, $600 million a year in the US. So it is quite small. So they do an amazing job digitally, but that's all they do. And they're really missing some of those other pieces of really building a more kind of fully established program. But they're quite happy with where they're at, I think. But they're missing some of that. So just a couple examples here. This is a bit of an old shot now. They change their website quite regularly as well. But a few things. Charity Water, no, it's a US-based organization for water for developing world. So a few things that I'll highlight here. One of the first things that you see is right in the middle here. We're a nonprofit organization on a mission to bring clean and safe drinking water to every person on the planet. Join us. So really succinct, this is what our organization does. And they even throw a little bit of an ask in there at the end with the join us. So that's one thing that you want to make sure is that when somebody comes there, they know immediately what your organization is all about. And they're not spending time trying to figure out exactly what you're doing. A few things here down below. We have sponsor a water project, start a fundraising campaign, and learn about the water crisis. So these are the three things they've identified are going to be sort of the primary purposes of somebody coming. They want to donate, they want to sponsor a project, they want to start their own fundraising campaign, or they want to learn more about what the issues are. So I think for any organization, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, there's going to be a few main reasons why somebody comes to your website. And so figuring out what those reasons are and making sure that's front and center so that they're not spending time trying to find what they need. Here's what you're probably interested in. We already know that. And then there's not much more on this page. Down below there's a little bit more about their impact. But really straight to the point, just focused on why somebody would be coming to that site.
What is it called again?
Charity Water. I think it's charity:water. Technically. And I think the site is charitywater.org, I believe, but if you just search on Google, you'll find it.
They have the most beautiful, effective videos.
They do almost everything digitally well. They do an amazing job with videos. This is an example, I think, from last year, from Thanksgiving. Again, really clear. 663 million people live without clean water. This holiday season, honor the people you care about with a donation that will bring clean water to families in need. Now, they focus it a little bit too big here. They probably should have taken it down a little bit more, sort of one family like we talked about earlier, but still really effective. So totally different from what they would normally do, but just an example of not really like crowdfunding or anything, but just more of sort of a specific target. Here's our Thanksgiving appeal, and then they ask you to give in honor of whoever these people are. And they ask for $30, which is a very modest amount as well. So they always try to keep it fresh. There's always different things that are happening, and they'll sort of play on what's happening in sort of the world around us, Thanksgiving being a big thing that a lot of people are focused on, and they'll use that to make sure that they're maximizing their fundraising. And if you see almost any time like a major disaster affects the world, Charity Water will almost always change their page to support that instead of their own cause. So they'll kind of turn that into how, like I know the Nepal earthquake was a big one for them. So their whole homepage was about the Nepal earthquake and how getting water in there is so key. So they'll be really flexible and adaptive to make sure that they're kind of changing with the trends as they happen. So this is another example that I really like to show. Similar to Charity Water, we've got 3 links in the middle here. Give today, get involved, your impact. That's really the first thing that catches your eye. They stand out, they're different colors. And so those are the 3 reasons why they've identified somebody coming. They want to donate, they want to get involved, whether that's through volunteering or something else, and then they want to see where the money's actually going. When you click through on these links, donation form on the left, it's a little fuzzy there, but straight to the donation form. If you click on the get involved, you've got different ways that you can participate. Again, whether that's volunteering or starting a fundraiser. So just really simple, really help them. Don't make them spend a bunch of time trying to find what they're looking for. Give it right to them right on the front so that they're not having to be confused or try to kind of fight their way through. So, and one of the most important things about that is certainly the donation form. That's going to be one of the main things that your donors are coming for. They want to make that donation. They want it to be quick and easy. So, and keeping in mind, many of our donors are older as well. It might seem easier, intuitive for us, but for somebody who's 75 or 80, it's probably not as intuitive for them. One of the things that I always like to do is find somebody older, whether it's mother, grandmother, whoever it is, and ask them to make a donation on your site. And resist the urge to help them. They probably won't click where you want them to. They probably won't do what you want them to. But watch what they do. That's probably what other people of a similar age are going to do. So that's a really good way to do it. They don't know your site. You know it too well to test it on yourself. So you really need somebody who doesn't spend all this time with it to go in there and see what they struggle with and judge off that for what you might want to improve. So just a few best practices. Make sure it's mobile friendly. That's definitely important. More and more we're seeing donations come through mobile devices, and that includes not just phones but tablets as well. And tablets is one a lot of people, they don't think about, but that's how a lot of people browse. And so making sure your website and your donation form look good on a tablet as well as they do on a computer. Keep it simple. That's really the most important thing. Monthly giving should always be an option on there. Again, like we talked about earlier, just making sure people are aware that's something they can do. They probably won't choose it for the most part, but make sure it's there, and some people will do that. Including your mailing address is one that a lot of people seem as a bit odd, but a lot of people will encounter troubles when they get onto a donation form. And so if you have any issues, please call us at this number. Please send in a check to this address. That'll help to alleviate them just giving up, because they'll be like, oh, okay, I'll just send it in instead. So stuff like that can make a difference in just making sure you're not potentially losing out on people who might get confused or stuck along the way for whatever reason.
So it's your mailing address or their mailing address?
Your mailing address. So just tell them if you're having any issues making your donation, you can send us a check at this address. Just to make it, again, simple for them, just in case they encounter any issues. And then really important as well is sending the tax receipt immediately. Most people are going on your website because they want to get that right away. So make sure then whatever system you're using to process that goes out. It should almost be instantly, but certainly within an hour worst case, but it really should be within a few minutes. Yeah, well, certainly the instant is important for the online donation. I would still send the handwritten thank you regardless. So even if you're sending the tax receipt, you can still send them a little handwritten note. Anything like that you can do to make it feel like a more personal experience is really valuable. Yeah, I think, to a degree for sure. I mean, I think if you have the ability to have your own donation page, I think that's worthwhile. If that doesn't work for your organization for whatever reason, then certainly having Canada Helps. I mentioned Chimp earlier as well. They have sort of similar functionality. Their fees are a lot lower than Canada Helps. It has to have something there. That's really the key. So yes, some donors might be like, oh, I don't want to donate through this, but I think Canada Helps especially is quite well known. And I don't think a lot of donors think about that other side of things that much. Some of them might be more aware, but I don't think that's a big thought that many of them are having, like, oh, a bunch of my money is going to Canada Helps. I think they assume it's quite low or free for most of them, but some of them will be aware of what the actual fees are.
Same when we make any credit card payments.
Yeah, and I think donors are aware of that as well, and that's why a lot of donors still like sending in a check, because they know that's all going to the cause as opposed to 2, 3, 4% getting charged by the credit card company. But at the same time, people want the convenience, so they're going to do what makes the most sense for them. Yeah. One thing that we've actually started to recommend to a number of our clients is including an Interact debit option on your donation form as well, if possible. In the States, you'll see a lot of charities use PayPal. PayPal's not that widely used in Canada. More of us are familiar with Interact Debit, so that's an option, if possible, to add that on, because there's no fees with that, or there shouldn't be anyways, and donors will be aware of that, particularly with larger gifts. I mean, even if it's $1 transaction fee, if they're giving you $500, that's a lot less than what it would have been if it was a 3% credit card charge at $15. Yeah.
Seeing a rise in transfers as well, or?
I think it's starting to rise. Yeah, I think donors are becoming more aware of that kind of stuff, so they're looking more for opportunities where they know that more of the money is going to the cause. So I think, donors are getting more comfortable with that. And I think as our older demographic just gets more comfortable with technology in general, there's going to be more of that happening for sure. And then the other one, which I haven't seen anything of in Canada yet, but Apple Pay and Android Pay, which I think will start to grow, particularly we chatted a bit about events. That could be a really effective way at events to, just tap your phone and give $10. The big advantage with that is with Apple or Android Pay, you can also share the information, because that's all built in. So you can also collect information that way. So that is something that not happening right now, but something to at least be aware of, because that could be something that, if I think those mobile payment options start to get a little more traction in Canada, that could be something that organizations are looking at as well. Like in the UK, where they're quite far ahead of us, they actually have at some of they have like charity shops where you can go in and buy like all sorts of different like things with the charity name, like cards and scarves and all sorts of different stuff. And some of them have actually started to put a little thing on their store window where you can just tap your phone and make a donation. So you can literally just be walking by, tap your phone, continue on with your day, but you've made your £5 or £10 donation. Yeah, so and I think it'll get to Canada. We'll have to see what happens. I feel like we've almost kind of skipped text to give because that didn't really catch on so much like it has in other countries. But who knows, it could still change. But I feel like we might just sort of skip texting and go straight into the mobile payments. And some of that is because some of the CRTC rules have made that very difficult. But that's why I feel like and they're trying to change it, but I feel like they're a little late to fix it. So I feel like we might just sort of skip that and just go straight to mobile payments, which is even easier. Yeah. So this is just one example. It's not showing up great, but this is a form that we developed for one of our clients. And this is the entire form, so very short, very simple. And one of the things which is tough to see here, when you complete each of the fields, when you complete it correctly, it turns green. Very universal, green means go. And you'll see down here, it's a little faint, but if you've completed this incorrectly, it turns red. And it says, please enter your first and last name. So you just put in a first name, it says, oh, wait a second. So rather than finishing it and then go to the top, oh, there's an error, please correct it. It helps you as you move through it. So again, just make it simple. Don't make them try to search for things and guess for things later. Anything you can do to make it simple and consistent is going to be helpful. So this is an example of probably the worst donation form I've ever seen from any charity. I believe there are 53 individual fields here. It does continue as one long form. I had to break it into 2 pieces. This is what you definitely do not want to do. There's a lot of info on here you really don't need to be collecting on a regular basis. The one reason I showed this example is because they have the CAPTCHA or whatever you want to call it at the bottom there, which generally would seem like an odd thing to include, and it does because especially for somebody who's older, those things can be really hard to figure out. I know even for me, like I'll struggle sometimes, like what is that? An O or a 0 or whatever, but what I have heard from some organizations is they've found that their forms are being used to test stolen credit cards. And so they'll try to put through a bunch of low-value donations to see if the credit cards work. And so if that's a concern, okay, fine, throw it on there. But if you don't have that issue, there's really no reason to put that because that's just adding a step that's likely going to cause all sorts of issues. And that's not like a big widespread problem or anything. But I have heard from some charities where they've seen like thousands of gifts try to go through, and that's just a big hassle. So putting something like that can prevent it, but I wouldn't recommend putting it on necessarily. The good news was this is St. Paul's Hospital. That was their old form. This is a new form, which they've changed since then, which I don't like it quite as much. And sorry, the screen, it's hard to read. This is really good because here you've got one-time donation. The option right below it is monthly donation, which is really good. And then right below that this is a little drop down for what area you're supporting. You have to give $20, which then takes you to the sort of the payment confirmation screen. And then the other thing you can't see on there, but it says if you have any questions or concerns, please email us or call us, and it gives you the information as well. So like I said, just make sure that information is there in case they want to choose that. Super simple. You click to give 20. You go through to the donation page, which you can't see at all. I don't know why those aren't showing up. Anyways, I think they're down to about, I think it was 12 or 13 fields there. One column, which is really good as well, because especially on mobile, it's really annoying to be like scrolling back and forth. If you can just scroll straight down, that's really helpful. And one of the things they do too is rather than having the sort of the header and then the box below it, it's in the box. So it shortens up the form so you don't have that extra space. And so once you start typing, it disappears, which is all pretty simple these days. So just little stuff like that, and keeping in mind that a lot of donors will be trying to do it from some type of mobile device. So yeah, we've talked a bit about some of these different areas. And again, it's not showing up great, but there's sort of just a few little notes in terms of each of the different groups there. But really, when we're talking about integration, we want to make sure there's a consistent message going out across all of our different channels, making sure that all of our different donor groups are seeing similar messaging with what we're doing. Particularly as we start to move, and that'll be a couple slides, we'll start to talk about year-end fundraising. That's when you really, really want to make sure everything's working really well together. And especially online, because you will have a lot of donors and prospective donors who are going to be going to your website at that time of year. But that's, like, we've seen huge increases over the last few years where more and more donors are going online just because that's convenient. They know they're going to get the tax receipt right away. So just really making sure that all your different groups are seeing similar messaging and somebody's not getting a monthly giving appeal that talks about one thing over here and then now you're talking about a totally different issue on your website because you don't know exactly how they're going to interact with you. And this is just another example. This one looks at sort of more activist to donor conversion, which we kind of chatted about with events earlier. But so really looking at, okay, so we bring in a new activist. They signed a petition, they took some kind of action, maybe they made a small donation or whatever it might be, and really the steps that we take to convert them to a regular donor. So we'll start off again with a bit of the stewardship, make sure they get a newsletter, make sure they see about what impact they've had, and then we'll move to possibly a phone call, and then possibly additional things after there. So just always sort of thinking about the donor journey and, okay, so you've got somebody who comes in, what do you want them to see? What are the logical steps that you want to provide them with to help them become hopefully a long-term donor for you? And same kind of thing when you're looking online as well. Somebody's on your website, what steps can you provide them with to make sure they can easily complete whatever goal they've come to your website with? Yeah, I can send the slides around as well for sure. Yeah, sorry, some of them just aren't showing up. They're fine on here, but I'm not sure. I think the screen's just, yeah.
You can share the slide with us.
Yeah, I can definitely send it around, yeah. Yeah, I can send it to Dan and then he can make sure to share it, yeah. Any questions there before we jump into year end? I think it's important, it's kind of a balance. I mean, people generally don't like that, but people also respond fairly well to it. And I think it depends on the type of call as well. One of our clients, they did a test and they had, I believe it was 8,000 donors, 4,000 of them, they called them just to say thank you. And then the other 4,000 they did not. And literally the call was just, oh, just calling to thank you for your support. And many of the donors were surprised, like, what, that's it? You don't need anything? And they looked at the results 12 months later, and those who had gotten a phone call had given 33% more income than those who hadn't. So it doesn't always have to be an ask either. So sometimes it can just be a touch point. Oh, hey, I wanted to make sure you got the newsletter. Did you have any questions about how we're spending your money, that kind of thing? So the asking is where people can be less kind of keen on it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work either. So it's just sort of a balance of figuring out how you want to approach that, but it's still a very effective tool for stewardship and making the ask depending, but being wary if you have a lot of donor concerns coming from it. Well, yeah, we don't work with Red Cross, so I can't speak specifically to that program. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we certainly, with many of our clients, we will use telemarketing to upgrade for monthly, for example. Normally, we'll try to put in place rules like, for example, if you were called, let's say you got called in 2016 and you said no, we won't call you in 2017. If you got called in 2016 and you said yes, we'll call you again because maybe you will upgrade. So we'll usually sort of like rest you for a year and then we might call you again the next year. So they may not have sort of similar rules. They may, and they have quite a large donor base, so they may have found that the more they ask, yes, they lose some people, but they convert more to monthly, so it works out for them. But it's certainly a fine line of possibly annoying you and possibly having you one time say, you know what, actually cancel my monthly support. I don't want to get all these calls all the time. So it's a fine balance for sure because it can be very invasive for people. There's a Charity Water example, but if you look on YouTube for Charity Water 5-year anniversary, I think this was 2011 or 2012 now, I think they're almost at 10-year anniversary. On their 5-year anniversary, they basically shut the office down and all anybody did was thank donors. So literally the entire team, they were phoning, they were sending emails, they were sending letters, they recorded videos, and they did a really cool video you can see on YouTube of just how that was. And I mean, it's really powerful for staff, for one, because that's really nice to do, and it makes a difference with the donors. So that's awesome that you guys did that, and I think, yeah, anytime you can do something like that, it's an easy job for volunteers as well, because they don't even need to know anything about the donor's name and phone number. They don't have to know anything about the history. They can just make phone calls. It's a really nice thing to do. And like I say, a lot of donors are like, what? That's all you wanted? You just want to say thanks? But they really appreciate it. And that's something that sticks with them as well. My favorite example of that is we had a client, and their policy is anytime they get a gift of a certain level, I think it's $5,000 and up, the highest ranking person on staff calls that donor within an hour of the gift coming in. So who's ever on staff that day, the highest ranking person does it. So they got a $10,000 gift just before the holidays. A lot of people were away. It was like December 22nd or something, so a lot of the office was away. The highest ranking person was like the head of gift processing. So she calls the donor, says thank you, and he says, "You're going to be really glad you called today because I made 5 $10,000 gifts, and I have an additional gift of $122,000 that I'm giving to the organization who called first, and that's you." Yeah. So you never know what games donors are playing. I mean, he had 5 organizations he cared about, and you know what? They were the ones who showed the appreciation. They got an additional $122,000. So you never know, but that kind of stuff can really make a big difference, and it just feels good. And if we think about really good customer experiences we've had or donor experiences, I'm sure many of us can think of examples where there was a really good follow-up, something really personal, and that really sticks with us, and we remember those types of things. And donors remember that too. So that's just something to keep in mind. Any of those good experiences we have, let's try to give as many of those to donors as we can. Yeah. Okay, so the rest of the time we'll really be focused on year-end fundraising, which, I mean, we're at, what is it, the 18th today, so we've got a couple months still before Christmas, and year-end really pushes up to December 31st. But really, December itself and sort of these 3 months are a really important time. A lot of charities will receive as much as 50% of their donations just in November and December. A lot of that is tied to the December 31st deadline for tax receipts in Canada. So a lot of donors are kind of on that thinking. Giving Tuesday is an example where there's a lot of stuff happening, so people are really thinking about it. So we really want to make sure that, first of all, we've got a plan, that we're ready for it, and that we sort of set ourselves up to hopefully collect as much of that as possible. So I'll go through a few best practices, and then I'll give sort of a couple examples of things that we've done with our clients, and then we'll get into a bit of an exercise so you can all sort of think about this year end, if you haven't already, for your organizations, and start to put a bit of a plan together for how you want to approach it. So first thing, make it clear. Don't try to trick them or anything. It's the holiday appeal. It's the year-end appeal. Start with that. They're expecting that anyways. Anything Christmas themed is always good. I know a lot of our organizations probably don't want to use the word Christmas because, yes, donors do have a lot of different religious beliefs and backgrounds, but the majority of our donors are still going to have some kind of Christian backing, so Christmas is still a big thing. And while some people might be offended that you didn't include all the holidays in there, people who celebrate Christmas are also going to be offended if you say Happy Holidays. So it's a balance there. Our preference is always to include Christmas. This example doesn't have it, but you could still say holiday appeal, and then you can lead the letter with this Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a balance there too. You don't have to sort of hit them over the head with it, but if it can at least be in there somewhere, it's usually beneficial in terms of the results you'll see. Make sure it's urgent as well. So this is for Canuck Place, which is a local children's hospice. You have 2 weeks left to make a difference. So this is one we send off sort of, I think it goes around about December 10th. And then, yeah, this is sort of the last chance to make a donation. So really give them, here's the reason you need to respond right now, because you only have a couple weeks left. We need the money to prepare for next year, and we want to make sure we can give you a tax receipt for this year. So always have that urgency in there. And don't sort of dance around it. Make sure this is the time to give. Make sure they're focused on it as well. We've talked a lot about stewardship, which is really important, whether that's through the phone or whether that's through another channel. Make sure you thank them for their past support. If they gave at this time last year, thank you for donating to our Christmas appeal in 2016. I hope we will support again in 2017. That gives people, first of all, good feelings about, oh yes, I remember doing that last year. But it also, okay, yeah, it's been a year, I should do it again this year. So there's a lot of benefits with referencing their past support. It would depend on the size of your database. I would say probably at a minimum, yeah, you want to have one for people who are either donated last year or are recent supporters, and then one for people who are you're trying to reactivate, who haven't given in a few years. For some of our clients, we might have up to, I don't know, 10 different versions. And that's not to say the whole letter's different, but 1 or 2 paragraphs where we talk specifically about their past support. So I'm not saying necessarily to do that. It'll depend on the size of your donor base and whether that makes sense. But certainly the more you can do to personalize it to each of your donor groups, the better it's going to be. Yeah. And what we'll do with some of them is, like at the year-end appeal, we'll say earlier this year you supported this case, and we've been able to accomplish this on that one. Now will you support this other thing? So it shows them, okay, yes, you supported recently. Here's the impact you've made, and now will you give again to support our next initiative. So there's ways to do it which still is almost like stewardship in a way, but still sort of respects the contributions they've made while still asking for it in the future. So one really important thing that we're gradually getting there with a lot of our clients is tracking the online revenue from your DM donors. So 10 years ago, most of the revenue that you're going to get from direct mail is given by check, given by credit card through the mail. But every year we see this increase, and more of sort of our traditional direct mail donors are now going online to give, because that's convenient for them. They know they'll get the tax receipt right away. And it's a little bit tricky because, like I said, most of our web traffic is likely coming through a Google search. So we don't really know how they came to make that search. We know there was some prompt, whether that was direct mail, whether that was email, something in the news, a friend mentioned it. There's lots of different prompts out there. But there was some reason they wanted to come. And so at the end of the day, it's tough to know specifically what it was that caused it. But especially on a year-end campaign, we want to look at everything together. Because if online's way up, that's great. But is that just because a bunch of our direct mail donors went online, or is that actually true online growth that we were able to generate through whatever efforts we were making? So I think just looking at the whole picture, with some of our clients, we've got direct mail, online, and email as separate budget lines within the same campaign. And then, so we have the whole budget. When we do the analysis, we're not looking at did email meet its target, we're looking at did the campaign meet its target, because we know all those channels are going to work together to help us get there. So I think just one thing to keep in mind is that we can't control how donors are going to respond. We need to make sure the website's strong, make sure the donation page is strong, and then just track everything together to make sure we've got a complete picture. So this one I already touched on, just making sure you integrate across all different channels. Even more important at the end of the year, just because of how many of your donors are likely to be on your website, likely to be on Facebook. Just making sure you've got your message out there through all the different channels and making sure it's consistent. Anybody here using Google Grants? Anybody familiar with Google Grants? Okay, so Google Grants is a program from Google, obviously. Basically what it does is it provides free AdWords for nonprofits. So if you sign up for it, it takes about a week or two to kind of go through just the checks and whatnot. They'll give you up to $10,000 a month in free Google advertising. So it's super valuable. As long as you're a registered charity, you can sign up for it. And like I said, it'll take a couple weeks. You can look online for sort of the steps. It's like 2 or 3 steps to work through. And so they'll give you that free advertising. And so you can go on to your Google Grants account and you can effectively just buy up search terms that would be related to your organization. So that's something that you should be doing anyways, because that's essentially just free money. There is some limitations with it. They only let you spend a certain amount per keyword, that type of thing. So you won't necessarily be able to do everything, but you can still make sure you have a much bigger presence with Google Ads. So on top of that, it may be worth spending some additional just regular Google AdWords money as well. But I would say start with the grant, see how that goes, kind of get a feel for what you're doing and seeing what kind of clicks you're generating. But yeah, really a great program that's useful at the end of the year, but useful anytime, just to make sure you're driving as much traffic to the website as possible. So email deliverability is a big subject right now. All the main email providers, so Gmail, Hotmail, etc., are really working at cracking down on spam, because there's a lot of competition with email platforms, and people are very adept to switching email addresses as well these days. So all the providers are really trying to crack down on spam, which means they're looking at basically the sort of the sender reputation. And if your sender reputation starts to drop, that means that Gmail or whatever provider it is going to start putting your stuff in junk mail, which means now people who are receiving it aren't necessarily seeing it because it's not making it to their inbox. So this is something to really watch for. I've even seen it recently on a couple of blogs that I've been receiving, and now they're into my junk mail. Not because I've flagged them as junk, but obviously because our service provider has flagged that IP or that domain as something that a lot of people have said they don't want to receive. And so now it's ending up in my junk mail. Now, I check that. It's my work email. But a lot of our donors aren't going to check that on a regular basis, and they may not see our message. So to make sure you're looking after the deliverability, you really have to watch for anything that's getting notified as spam or unsubscribe. Any email platform, whether that's MailChimp or something else, will give you that information. Really watch those metrics carefully. Make sure they're not creeping up. But then also looking at those who are opening your emails. There's likely going to be a group who open all your emails, and at the same time there's going to be a group who probably open none of your emails. If you find that, and again, most email platforms these days will make that fairly easy for you, you may not want to send to those other people, because that's likely just affecting your deliverability. If they do open it, they might be like, oh, I'm tired of these guys, spam. And now you've hurt yourself. So rather than sending it to them, if they haven't opened anything in a year, they're probably not going to suddenly change their mind. So really kind of focus, look at who's opening your messages and focus on those ones first. They're the ones who are going to be your best supporters. They're the ones who are actually going to donate anyways. So there's no reason to send a bunch of other stuff to people who aren't looking. Shortly after the CASL, everybody's somewhat familiar with CASL? Canadian anti-spam legislation? Yeah. Shortly after that went into play, I think 2014, I was at a seminar and Best Buy was there. And they were saying they had interpreted the rules very strictly. They had essentially deleted 80% of their email list because of the new rules. And they were actually really excited about it because that 80% of the people who never open, who never do anything. So they'd been able to essentially, this was a good reason to do it, just cull their list down to just the 20% who are actually their best customers. So they actually looked at it as a real benefit because they didn't have to spend all this time segmenting all these people who were never going to purchase. They could now just focus on their best customers in that case. But same thing for us with donors. Make sure we're just sending content to those who are likely going to respond. Otherwise, you just risk getting deliverability issues. And now if you're not even making it into the inbox, now the people who actually want to see it aren't seeing it either. So it becomes a real challenge. And there's actually been, I've heard a few stories from organizations in the States where they've essentially had to get a new IP and sort of rebuild from scratch because their old IP was flagged as junk by most of the providers and they couldn't get any messages through. So they were only getting like 10% of the messages actually into the inbox. So they had to go through, which is a very long process of getting a new IP and building up your reputation slowly. So it's a really important thing just to keep in mind that yes, we have probably lots of emails. We don't just want to blast everything to everyone because that's going to hurt us in the long run.
Can we find out who opens our emails and who doesn't?
You should be able to through, I mean, if you're just sending it through Outlook, no. But if you're using some kind of provider, whether that's MailChimp or Constant Contact or anybody else, you'll be able to see in the metrics there of who's actually opened it. Yeah. The thing is, the providers want to make it easy for you as well because that's better for them. Because now if everybody sends 30% of the emails they were, their system's running that much more efficiently because they're not blasting at all these emails, taking back all these bounces and unsubscribes. So they actually want you to do it because it helps their efficiency as well. Yeah. Likely not, because you're probably sending individual emails through Outlook or Gmail or whatever it is, which doesn't really have that built in. So yeah, you're really only going to see that on the mass side. But the thing is, if for some reason your domain starts to get flagged as a bad domain, even those individual emails you're sending might end up in somebody's spam folder because it's the domain that's flagged. So if you're not doing any mass stuff, you probably don't have any issues because hopefully you're only emailing people who want to hear from you and they're opening it and reading it. So it's only when you start doing some of the more mass stuff you're likely to run into issues, but still something to sort of pay attention to. Like, for example, if you were talking to a donor and they're like, oh yeah, your message went into spam last week, and then it was a personal message, that would maybe reflect, okay, maybe something's not quite right, and try to investigate to see what might be going on. Yeah. So another thing on integration, again, leveraging all your channels. I mentioned earlier, sending a follow-up email to any direct mail campaign you're doing is really good. Number of years ago, they used to say you need sort of 7 impressions to get somebody to make a purchasing decision. I've heard now anywhere 11, 13, 15 impressions just because of the number of advertisements we're all blasted with, most of which we don't even really notice on a daily basis. But little things like sending a follow-up email, pushing out content through Facebook, all those little things help to make sure that people are seeing it and then hopefully going to respond in the end. They might not do it today, but the more of that you do, the more likely they will in the future. Anything you're doing, email, online, you should always be sending it back to your donation form. Again, like we said earlier, make it simple for them. Don't make them try to figure out where you want them to go. Even if you have a video that you're sending through email, if they click on that video, best thing to do is to have that video at the top of your page with a donation form below it. If you send them onto YouTube, Now they're on YouTube and they're going to be watching some other video, and now they're distracted and they're not going to come back. So no matter what we're doing, we want to make sure we try to keep them on our page as much as possible, but make sure the donation page is always there, because if it's not, there's way too many distractions out there and they'll end up seeing something else, and now they're focused on that and they've lost the goal of what they came with originally, which was making a donation. I think I've said this a few times, but keep it simple. Make sure no matter what, everything's there that they need. Don't make them try to find anything or have to look something up. Make sure all the information they're going to need is there. One example I always give is when you've got an online donation form, there's no reason to require a phone number. You don't need that to process the gift. Sure, it's nice to get it, but if somebody looks at that and like, oh, I don't want to get called, so now I'm not donating, you've lost out. So sure, have a phone number field there, just don't make it required. Let them provide it if they want, which means they may actually want to be called, or let them just make the donation without. So sometimes less is more. I know we're always eager to get as much data as we can, but if it's data that's going to potentially hurt the response, it's not worth having there. And if you ever are doing a telemarketing campaign, they can do a match, and they will match up all your donors with a phone number. They can usually match about 70%. So even if you don't have a lot of phone numbers, if you work with a telemarketing service provider, they can get most of those phone numbers for you if you wanted to do that. Lightboxes are another, so lightboxes, for anybody who doesn't know, is basically that little box that pops up in front of a website when you get there. They're really popular, especially at year end. Almost everybody uses them. They can work. The one thing is Google actually, they are soon going to be punishing pages, punishing meaning lower search results, if the lightbox covers more than 50% of the page. So that's just something to watch for, because Google has determined that that's not always the most useful thing. So yeah, put a small lightbox on there, you're fine. But so when you go to a website, the little box that pops up with a little X in the corner to close it, it's sometimes a video, or sometimes if it's Red Cross, maybe it's their emergency appeal for whatever is happening. They can be useful, but just making sure you're not like super focused. Oh, I heard lightboxes are great. Okay, yes, they can be. Make sure it's on campaign with what else you're doing, but don't feel like you have to do it. And just watch the size of it as well, because you don't want to hurt yourself in Google search rankings just to put it on there. It's a pop-up essentially, yeah. So, I mean, it's not it's not an ad necessarily. It's usually from the site itself, but it's still an ad, and Google's trying to make sure that it's not a pop-up and not affecting the browsing experience. And that's why Google is soon going to be punishing it, because they've decided that's not effective as a browsing experience. And Google, their goal is always to make sure they deliver you a really good browsing experience. And so they've decided that's not good. Like, you want to be able to move on to the site. So that's why they said if it's more than 50%, then soon you're going to be seeing lower search rankings, yeah. Social media, really important. There's a number of different ways you can use social media. One of the really nice things you can do in social media is collect stories that way. Depending on the type of organization, there may be a great opportunity to talk to your donors about their personal story, why they wanted to get involved. It's a really nice thing to do. I mean, it is social media, and I think a lot of times we forget that social part, and we look at it as just a corporate platform to blast out all sorts of content, but it's about being social. So be friendly, chat with your donors, like their status. There's lots of little things that you can do to really make it more social. One of the other things to keep in mind, Facebook, most of us are probably on it. Most of our donors are probably on it as well. Really great platform, but Facebook has, in the last couple of years, really limited the organic reach you will get from any of your posts. If you are posting something on Facebook, you're likely only hitting about 5% of your likes with it, because that's how Facebook wants it, because they want you to pay for ads. So you can pay for ads and boost your post, or do an ad, whatever it is, to make sure you actually reach all of your likes. That's the only way you can actually do it. Otherwise, somewhere between 5 to 10% is all you'll reach of the likes on your page. So, and that's exactly how Facebook wants it, because they want you to pay for advertising. Now, the advertising they offer is really robust. It's a really good tool. The targeting you can get right down. You can target just the people who like your page. You can target people who like your page and their friends. You can target women who are 55 plus living in Burnaby, whatever it is. And you can do lookalike audiences as well. So you can say, give me people who look like this group. And then you can even, if you have a big email list for your donors, you can put that in, and Facebook will identify how many of those people are on Facebook. So there's lots of different ways that you can really target the advertising. It's not terribly expensive. I mean, you can reach out. You can probably reach 1,000 people for less than $50. So it's not terribly expensive, but there is a cost there. But it's really worthwhile, particularly if you have a year-end campaign. Certainly making sure you're pushing it out to all of your likes at least, and then possibly to people beyond that as well. Well, and then yeah, I mean, depending on the cause, you're going to have more just sort of natural reach. If it's Save the Bears, people are going to be more inclined to share that. And the other thing with social media is if people are sharing it, that's one way you can get the content out there, because when somebody shares it, it's going to go to some of their friends. If one of them shares it, it's going to go out further. So encouraging people to share is a really useful thing as well, because that you can sort of cheat the system a little bit, because it will push out more that way. And the more people who share it, the wider the audience is going to get. So that's one thing. But people at the same time are also less inclined to share because they know that gets out to all their friends. And so they don't always want that depending on the cause. So Facebook ads, certainly a good tool. If you haven't tried it, something to at least test. And it's really easy. Once you've set up the account, basically all you have to do is load in a credit card, and then it'll give you an option when you're on the management screen to boost the post. And then you just pick how you want to do it, how much money you want to spend. It goes out, it'll show you all the metrics for how many people saw it, how many people engaged with it. So it's a really good platform, but unfortunately, if you do want to reach all the people who have liked your page, you do have to pay a little bit of money to do it. Mentioned this earlier, but don't forget to say Merry Christmas. Use Christmas if you can. If you have to say Happy Holidays, okay, but Christmas is always better. And there's no reason you can't just send a message out wishing all of our donors a Merry Christmas. Send an email. I just wanted to send you a quick note to wish you a Merry Christmas. I hope you and your family have an amazing time, whatever it is. So that's really powerful. Even if it's not an ask, it still shows that you're paying attention. Again, being social, just engaging, it's a nice thing to do, and donors will appreciate that. If we happen to know that they celebrate Hanukkah, wishing you a happy Hanukkah is great too. So the more personal we can get, the better with it for sure. So I'll show you a couple examples here. So this is a campaign, that we ran for the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. So we did this first in 2014, was the first time we did a big integrated campaign for them. So you see we've got the letter there, email. This was the website banner that was used. So making sure that no matter what channel they came to us through, they were seeing consistent content. What we saw with this one, when we did the really big integrated campaign, we were about 35% ahead of our budget for that year, which was obviously really fantastic to see in terms of the dollars raised. And more interesting than that possibly is that the revenue that was received from our direct mail donors, 53% of that revenue came online. And that was our very traditional direct mail donors who have given through the mail in the past, and more than half of their income came online. And we certainly attribute that to all the different things that we were doing. We had the website, we had the email, we had Facebook advertising happening. Really successful. It's grown every year since then, which is great, especially because I think this was the next year. And you'll see we had this little kind of background banner. So we kept that running. We had a bit of a different message. So little things like that, again, to just sort of increase the memory recall. I think I threw in, yeah, so there's, again, email, pulling that together and using it for a thank you as well. So you can turn Christmas from a worry into a joy, but then bring it back with a thank you, just so it's really consistent with the content that they're seeing across all channels. This is the one we're doing for this year, which we've changed up a bit in terms of the messaging. We do have Christmas on there, which is key. So we have sort of the fruits and veggies hanging from the tree. They've changed their sort of their direction a little bit. They're a little bit more focused on providing healthy, fresh food now, as opposed to sort of the old model of here's a bunch of canned food, which is really great. So we've kind of changed our fundraising and marketing along with that. And again, email, website banner, everything's aligned. No matter what channel they're connecting with us, they're going to see a similar message there. And then same thing on Facebook. Little touches like even changing the profile picture is a nice thing to do if you have something that's part of the campaign. Because again, they might see that popping up in different messages. And so the more of those little touches that you can include along the way, the more effective it's going to be at really bringing it all together for them. So this is another example. This was a couple of years ago for the Mustard Seed in Calgary, which is a homeless shelter. And so we did this campaign for them. We had a hashtag that we ran through the whole campaign, which was Give Hope YYC, which is the Calgary airport code. And hashtag is another good way you can really sort of carry content through multiple different social media. They use hashtags on all the main social media now. It used to just be Twitter, but now it's on everything. So that's a really nice thing you can do to encourage more sharing, make sure you're getting your message out there. It also makes it a bit easier for you to look back afterwards to see what was happening, and I'll show you a few things with this campaign on that. That is not showing up well, but that's email, donation form, which would look similar if it was there. Again, bringing it all together, we see the hashtag here, Give Hope YYC. And one of the things we did here is it was a 30 days of giving hope. And so we used that as an opportunity to share different stories. We asked people to share their stories. We had a lot of people who were saying they went out and bought sandwiches and gave it to homeless people over here, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of really powerful stories that people were sharing. And then we also, one of the things that we did as part of the campaign, we created different ways to give. So they were all branded within the campaign, but different ways that people could support that campaign. So whether it's giving money to buy a meal, donating winter clothing, I think there was 8 or 10 different ways to give that we shared through social media. So a really nice thing to always have something popping up, and you never know exactly what people are going to sort of key on, and oh yeah, I have lots of winter clothing I could donate. So just like we said earlier, making sure there's lots of different ways, keep it simple for them, but make sure that you've got that message through all your channels, so they're seeing consistent messaging, and they're really starting to put the campaign together. And then just some of the tweets that we had there. And yeah, lots of people using that Give Hope YYC. We had some from the news as well, but yeah, I think in the end we had, and this is just in Calgary, we had close to 2 million Twitter impressions, which was actually really strong for, I mean, Calgary's only about a population of 1 million people, so we were really pleased with that. And we beat all the campaign targets that we had. I think we were about 20% ahead in terms of the revenue for the campaign. So just really good example of how to really kind of push it out there and make sure that people are seeing that same content, but also giving them a really good reason to give as well. So a couple different ways. So on Twitter specifically, and I think Facebook's doing a bit of this too, they'll have trending hashtags. So you'll see which hashtags are trending, like the Me Too example right now. That's sort of the biggest trending one right now. So you'll be able to see, and you can look up content based on what's trending. For the organization, it makes it easier because they can just do a search for, like this tweet, for example. It doesn't have the organization tagged in it, but they can do a search for hashtag Give Hope YYC and find people who are commenting and making sure they can continue that conversation as well. Because they may just post a personal status, and if you don't have the hashtag there, you might never see it. But with the hashtag, you can actually see what people are doing, and it makes it easier to connect with them directly as well.
Just sort of a spreading the word thing rather than a
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah, it's more so just to make sure the word's getting out there, and maybe somebody puts something on Facebook and they're like, Give Hope YYC, and their friend sees like, what is Give Hope YYC? They can now look at it. So it's just really kind of getting the word out there and really helping with the consistency. Any other questions on any of that? Okay. So we can have a quick stretch if we want. So what I'd like to do is just a quick exercise. We'll maybe spend, I don't know, 20 or 25 minutes kind of working through this, and I can come around if you guys have any specific questions. So I've sort of thrown lots of different stuff at you for year end, but given that we only have a couple of months until we actually get there, I think it would be good for each of us to think about our own organizations, and if you already have a campaign, great. I've got a few things in here that I'll get you to sort of run through, make sure you're thinking about. If you don't have a campaign yet, then to start thinking about how you want to package up that year-end campaign, whether you need to have a hashtag there, what sort of that campaign target is going to be. And like I said, I'll sort of come around. If you have any questions, you can let me know, and then we'll go from there. So first thing, so again, thinking about sort of year-end specifically. So what's your unique selling proposition? So this is kind of a marketing term for anybody who doesn't know. This is basically what sets your organization apart, what makes your organization different that somebody would want to support you over a similar organization. So integration, talked about that a number of times, that's really essential. We need to make sure that whatever channel donors are coming to us from, they're seeing a similar message. We don't want to confuse them with one thing over here and something different over there. Monthly and legacy giving, They do take a little bit of work to sort of get going, especially with legacy. It's going to take some investment up front, but those are things that are going to be really helpful for the long-term stability of your organization and really making sure you're prepared for future success. Donors really do want choice as well. We can't just get them like 30 years ago, everybody's watching the same 4 TV channels, so they don't have a lot of choice. They're going to see our ad. Now they have unlimited choice, so looking at the different places that our donors are, making sure we are finding ways to catch them on those channels. One thing I always say as well, I mean, yes, Facebook, Twitter, probably. There's a whole lot of other social media channels, Snapchat, Pinterest, etc. Is that right for you? Maybe. See if your donors are there. There's no reason you can't try a few things, see if that gets some engagement. If it does, keep doing it. If not, oh well. It was an experiment. It doesn't take a lot of time to try some of these new things. So just see what, and let your donors tell you what they're interested in. But make sure that they've got the options no matter what it is. And then last thing we just touched on, reporting back is critical. Make sure you're getting that thank you letter out. Make sure you're getting that tax receipt out. And really focus on getting that as specific as possible, because the more specific you can be, the more likely they're going to give again in the future. Just using the charity water example, whenever they complete a water project, they will send a video and an email to all the donors who helped fund that project, and they will see the actual completion of the well and the elation of the children as they see clean water for the first time possibly ever. So that's the ultimate in reporting back. We want to do as much of that as possible to really be able to show exactly what we accomplished with their money. So is there any other questions that anybody has? Yeah, I would say, I mean, if it's that they're saying they really don't want to be called, let's make sure we don't call that donor again. But if they're saying they're just, oh, you're just calling to say thank you? Oh, okay. That's fine. Like that's going to happen because they're going to be surprised, because when they hear from a charity, they expect to be asked. That one example I gave you where they did the test and they called half their donors and they had 33% more revenue at the end of the first year, that's really the value in doing it. But like I say, if you have a donor who's like, oh, I hate being called, okay, let's just make sure we don't call them again. But I wouldn't let that sort of slow you down. Like, what's your guys' experience? Yeah. And I think, I mean, yeah, phoning is one. I think email is another area where I think we tend to focus on asking. Stewardship through email is great as well. And I think that's, again, having the balance there so it's not just they know it's an ask every time, because then they don't have to open it. Because if it's an ask every time, they'll open it when they want to give. If you have a mix of asks and stewardship, now they're going to have to, oh, I wonder what this one is, and they're more intrigued to see what it is, right? So I think just having that mix there, and sometimes I guess it's sort of fighting that perception where you're calling me, you must want money. And so they'll adapt and they'll learn to be over time as well as you do it more often. No, and it's a conversation, and certainly, yeah, you can ask them, how have you found our communication over the last 12 months? Has there been any projects that you were really excited about? Like, sure, little things like that, learn a little bit more. Make sure you record that in the database, because you're going to want to have that info, particularly if they say, like, oh, you guys are mailing way too much. Well, okay, maybe mail them a little less, whatever it happens to be. But yeah, have that conversation. I mean, it's not just us pushing it out of them, it's a conversation. And is there any questions that you have for me about the organization? Like, you can open it up, and you'll often have really good conversations with donors that way, because first of all, it's unexpected and they're not getting that from a lot of other people. But it's also nice for them to be able to feel like they're being heard and you're listening to what they have to say. Yeah. And I think one thing you said there is really important. It's really about listening. It's not about you telling them a whole bunch more stuff about the organization. It's about, like you said, giving them the platform. If they take it, great. Most of them won't. You might have a half-an-hour conversation if they really want to go on and on, but just giving them that platform and listening and taking in what they say. We're obviously not going to make changes to our program based on what one person says, but we can still listen, take that feedback in, and if we start to hear that from a bunch of people, okay, maybe we need to make some changes.
Yeah, people say the same thing about your organization. That's a trend, right? So.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, I think but the listening I think is really the key thing there. Like, just take it in, take a moment, and just see what they have to say. Yeah, see, it's tough. I mean, for really small groups, they can sort of do okay online, and I think it gets to a point where you probably once you've established a bit of a donor base, like I think initially for you guys, you're not going to send a direct mail out to 10 people, right? So you kind of have to get a bit of a base going, and then once you have a bit of a donor base there, then you can maybe mail them a newsletter, maybe mail them an appeal. So I think kind of like step by step, like the online stuff certainly really important, but I think it gets to a point where you need to sort of start kind of branching out a little bit and trying different things, and maybe you start on the phone instead of through the mail. But it's worth trying, because I mean, most donors don't like to be called, but some donors really like to talk. And so maybe they do want to have that phone call so they can tell you all about what they think about this issue. And then now they're going to give you $100 at the end of the call, right? So I think it's about sort of just trying different things. Mail is one that it does take a little bit of resources to make happen. You do need a bit of a donor base there usually. You don't want to just start off sort of cold with that, especially if you don't have a huge reputation because people don't really know who you are. But I think it's really just about trying different things and seeing, okay, we've found this thing, it's really working, let's keep pushing that, whatever that happens to be. But I can't say like this is the exact thing you need to do because it's different for each organization and it depends on what the cause is and who you're reaching out to and what kind of donors you have as well. Yeah, bang on time.